My name is Reagan, and I'm going to be reading from Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Moby-Dick. Chapter 1. New Memes. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin and warehouses, and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to command.
Hi everyone, it's Miss Mac. I'm going to start by catching us up on part 2 of Frankenstein. So we read the letters in class and we started chapters 1 and 2. So I'm going to pick up today with chapter 3. So this video is just going to be for the read aloud portion. I'll post another video later that goes through the annotations. Okay, so you'll see a video of me going through how to mark.
Hey,
but this
happy Thursday.
It's going to be the read aloud
again. Sorry guys, I don't know what's going on with my computer right now. It just crashed and kicked me out. So just as I was about to start. So we didn't get through any reading, but we did get through a lot of exposition. Quarantine story hour, which me with Charlotte and her crummy computer reading War and Peace, which is a thick book, just getting started. Thank you to those who've been watching. Sorry for the tech trouble. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'll see what I can do about preventing it. This is the second time it's happened in the last couple weeks.
Hi friends, my name is Christina. I'm the manager of the Pacific Beach Library here in San Diego, and I am happy to welcome you today to our first day of our read-along together of Dracula by Bram Stoker. Dracula was originally published in 1897 by Bram Stoker, and in a fun little bit of trivia, he was born in 1847, which is the same year that Jane Eyre was published. That was the first book that we read aloud together back, starting in April. And so for those of you who've been with us from the beginning, we're kind of coming full circle. We're reading a book that was published by somebody who grew up in the time of Jane Eyre, and so now we have Dracula. This one is an interesting read. It is, and they are organized as journal entries. And I'm trying to make up my mind if I want to actually, because I've never read this book before, I think I'm going to try to not read too far ahead and maybe see if we can actually get this experience of reading it completely together for the first time. Also, by the way, if anyone would like to comment as to whether you've read the book before, I think that would be interesting. So yeah, if you want to comment and let us know if you've read this before or if it's your first time, that would be lovely. We usually, for these read-alouds, in case there's anybody new, I call the group Tea with Dracula. I do need to change the name on the group. So I usually start out with a little tea to enjoy during my read. Sorry, they disconnected for a second. Today's tea that I'm drinking is a blood orange tea. Very appropriate since we're reading Dracula. And actually, though, I finished off my tin of blood orange, so I'm going to have to buy some more loosely blood orange tea, or see about finding some other bright red teas. Sorry about that. My connection has gone out twice today. It's an interesting day, but it's okay. Like Dracula, we will rise again. Alright, so let's try this blood orange tea. Really, really good. If you'd like to comment too as to what tea you're drinking, I'm always interested to see. I love getting new ideas about good teas to enjoy. Ooh! Jenna was saying she listened to the Orson Welles radio version of Dracula. That does sound like it would be delightful. He has such a good voice, and I think he'd really amp up the drama of it. Alright, so let's start with Chapter 1 of Dracula, and it's entitled Jonathan Harker's Journal, and it says it's kept in shorthand. If there's anything else like that that are in italics, I'll go ahead and do that, or it's not italics, in like parentheses where they're listening it that way, I'll make the little parentheses hands to kind of indicate that as well. Also, before we get started, I should apologize. There are going to be many words that I will not know how to properly pronounce. I'm going to do my best and go through them, and I will try to be consistent in how I pronounce / mispronounce. But if any of you actually do know the proper pronunciations, sorry, it disconnected again. Hopefully we'll make it through today. But yeah, if you actually do know the proper pronunciation, if I'm really butchering it badly, go ahead and put a comment and let me know so that way I can do it better the next day as we can. Okay, I think hopefully we're past all the disconnects, and let's keep going. Ready? Chapter 1 of Dracula, Jonathan Harker's journal, kept in shorthand. 3rd of May, Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place from the glimpse which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east. The most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us among the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time and came after nightfall to Klausenburg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which was very good, but thirsty. Memorandum, get recipe from Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika Händel, and that, as it was a national dish, I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having had some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with the noblemen of that country. I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own Ordnance Survey maps. But I found that Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with me. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them the Wallachs, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyars in the west, and Zikelis in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in it. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. Memorandum. I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have had something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe and was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept and was wakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika and a sort of porridge of maize flour which they said was mamaliga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish, which they call implatata. Memo. Get recipe for this also. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather, it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on the top of steep hills, such as we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams which seemed from the wide stony margin on each side of them to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outer edge of a river clear. At each station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers, but others were very picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when you got near them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or other, and most of them had big belts with a lot of strips of something fluttering from them, like the dresses in a ballet. But of course there were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage, they would be set down at once as some old oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place. Being practically on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina, it has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war proper being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Throne Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress, white undergarment with long double apron, front and back, of colored stuff fitting almost too tight for modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The Herr Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to the elderly man in white shirt sleeves who had followed her to the door. He went, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow, the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land.
I am.
Your friend, Dracula."
We do not know you, young knight.
4th of May.
We have no
I found
understanding
that my
as to
landlord
many
had got a
centuries.
letter from the Count
It is to
directing
them
him to
to turn
secure the
trouble
best
like
place
this.
on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to details, he seemed somewhat reticent and pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least he answered my questions exactly as if he did. He and his wife, the old lady who had received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money I had been sent in a letter.
I'll look into it for you.
Excuse me. He mumbled out that
what
the
I can
money
see.
had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew.
Great.
When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me
meet you
anything
in
of
the
his
village in an
castle,
hour.
both he and his wife crossed themselves and, saying that they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask anyone else, for it was all very mysterious and not by any means comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young Herr, must you go?" She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew, and mixed it all up with some other language which I did not know at all. I was just able to follow her by asking many questions. When I told her that I must go at once and that I was engaged on important business, she asked again, "Do you know what day it is?" I answered that it was the 4th of May. She shook her head as she said again, "Oh yes, I know that, but do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I did not understand, she went on, "It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you are going and what you are going to?" She was in such evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go, at least to wait a day or two before starting. It was all very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I therefore tried to raise her up and said, as gravely as I could, that I thanked her, but my duty was imperative and that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking a crucifix from her neck, offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for as an English churchman, I have been taught to regard such things as in some measure idolatrous.
It's from the Ritter
And
family
yet
lawyers.
it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary round my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and went out of the room.
Gabriel,
I am
just
writing up
notified
this
the
part of the
Catholic Church about a
diary
miracle.
whilst I am waiting for
Things
the
have
coach,
actually been
which
picking
is,
up
of
around the
course,
shop.
late.
We've
And the
been going through
crucifix
stock
is still
like-
round my neck.
Well, like a real
Whether it is
store.
the old lady's fear or the many
expecting the
ghostly
candid
traditions
camera
of
guys
this
to
place,
pop out at any
or the
moment and
crucifix
say,
itself,
"Just kidding."
I do not know.
In other
But I
acts
am
of
not
universal
feeling nearly as
randomness,
easy in my
the
mind as
Losing
usual.
Murders is up to number 20
If
on
this
the New York
book
Times
should ever
bestseller
reach Mina
list.
before I do,
Yes,
let it bring my
of the
goodbye.
American public
Here
can be a
comes the coach.
terrifying thing.
5th of May,
In any
the
case,
castle.
Your U.S.
The
bank
gray
account
of the
is
morning has
blossoming.
passed,
Not
and the
unlike
sun is
desert
high
after a
over the
fluke
distant
storm.
horizon, which seems jagged. Whether with trees or hills, I know not, for it is so
Gabriel?
far off that big things and little are mixed. I am
If you
not
don't
sleepy,
mind, I'd
and as
like
I
to
am not
use a
to be
little of the
called
money
till I
to fix
awake,
up the shop.
naturally I write till sleep comes.
Your gran is fine,
There
but
are
misses
many
you.
odd things to put down,
Mostly
and lest
has been
who
hanging
reads them
around
may
making
fancy
himself
that
a
I
real
dined
pain in
too
the
well
butt.
before I left Bistritz.
Fortunately, I need
Let
only
me put
bring up
down
the
my
ball
dinner
protected
exactly.
mostly in
I
your
dined
book.
on what they
All
call
240
robber steak.
pounds of him,
Bits of
and your
bacon,
pal
onion,
turns
and
red and
beef,
is out the door in
seasoned
about
with red
5
pepper and
seconds.
strung on sticks and roasted over
Things
the
are
fire
organized
in
here.
the simple
Just
style
waiting
of
for
the
your
London
decision.
cat's meat.
I think you can find
The
a
wine
buyer
was
if you
golden
want to go that
mariage,
route.
which produces
I know
a
you
queer
hate to
sting on the
write, but
tongue,
I need
which
to get
is,
a feeling
however,
for
not
what your plans
disagreeable.
are so I can
I
make
had
some of
only a
my
couple of
own.
glasses of this, and
I
nothing
haven't
else.
seen or heard of anything
When I
here
got
that
on the
seems
coach,
relevant
the
to the
driver had not
shot-and-neighbor
taken his
business.
seat, and I saw
Take
him
care.
talking with the landlady.
Grace.
They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door, which they call by a name
Schottenjäger
meaning
knife.
word bearer, came and listened, and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words, often repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the
Wow.
crowd.
It
So I
actually has
quietly got
money
my
in it these
polyglot
days.
dictionary from my bag and looked them up. I must say they were not cheering to me, for amongst them
My
were Ordog, Satan, Pokal, Hell, Stragoika, Witch,
Brilliant
Vrolak,
crows, if I do
and
say so myself.
Lekoslak, both of which mean the
Unfortunately,
same
I'm
thing,
pissing the
one
wind
being
until I
Slovak
can think of
and
a
the other
plot line.
Serbian for something that is either
Maybe this
werewolf
case
or
will inspire me.
vampire. Memo. I must ask the Count about these superstitions.
Alright, so 22.
When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some
My
difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not explain at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm or guard
Dual
against the
mouth.
evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown
Little
man.
too tasteful, if
But
you ask
everyone
me.
seemed so kind-hearted
Gracie ordered
and
them.
so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn yard and its crowd of picturesque figures,
Family
all
talisman.
crossing themselves
Wolfgang
as they
gave up
stood
his life
round
to get
the
this
wide
back.
archway, with its background of rich foliage of oleander and orange trees and green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the box seat, Gotza, they call them, cracked his big whip over his 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scene as we drove along. Although, had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steep hills, crowned with clumps of trees or with farmhouses, the blank gable end to the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit blossom, apple, plum, pear, cherry, and as we drove by I could see the green grass under the trees spangled with the fallen petals. In and out amongst these green hills of what they call here the Mittelland ran the road, losing itself as if swept round the grassy curve, or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillsides like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo
I can't read
Prone.
much of it.
I
but
was
they give the
told
name
that
of the
this
zoo.
road is in
It says
summertime
Dalkirk in it.
excellent, but that it
The name
had
of the
not yet
detective
been
on the
put in
case
order
is
after the
Leva
winter
from the
snows.
police station
In this
near
respect, it is
Prince
different
Jensen
from the general
Plants.
run of roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept in too good order. Of old, the hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turk should think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittelland rose mighty slopes of forest up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling full upon them and bringing out all the glorious colors of this beautiful range.
Night. The
Deep
keys for
blue
the
and
car
purple
by
in
the
the
door.
shadows of the peaks,
It is better not to
green
drive
and brown
inside
where
me,
grass and
drive
rock
Route
mingled,
96 to
in an
Lockham.
endless perspective of
Park the car
jagged
and
rock
take the
and
U-Bahn
pointed
from
crags,
there.
till
Thank you
these
for
were
helping.
themselves lost in the
Proud of you.
distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly.
And from behind the door came the regular sounds of a living.
Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the... Sorry, it disconnected there. Let's read that sentence again. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept round the base of a hill and opened up the lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain, which seemed, as we wound on our serpentine way, to be right before us. Look! Easton Sec! God's seat, and he crossed himself reverently. As we wound on our endless way, and the sun sank lower and lower behind us, the shadows of the evening began to creep round us. This was emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountain tops still held the sunset and seemed to glow out with a delicate, cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks, all in picturesque attire, but I noticed that Guatra was painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses, and as we swept by, my companions all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or woman kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me. For instance, hay ricks in the trees, and here and there very beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a later wagon, the ordinary peasant's cart, with its long snake-like vertebra, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs with their white, and the Slovaks with their colored sheepskins, the latter carrying lance fashion their long staves with axe at end. As the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness.
I'm afraid you write a lot of nonsense. I'll read the third.
As the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness, the gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine, though in the valleys which ran deep between the spurs of the hills, as we ascended through the pass, the dark firs stood out here and there against the background of late-lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods that seemed in the darkness to be closing down upon us, great masses of grayness, which here and there bestrewed the trees, produced a peculiarly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fancies engendered earlier in the evening, when the falling sunset threw into strange relief the ghost-like clouds, which amongst the Carpathians seemed to wind ceaselessly through the valleys. Sometimes the hills were so steep that despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk up them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. No, he said. You must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce. And then he added, with what he evidently meant for grim pleasantry, for he looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest, and you may have enough of such matters before you go to sleep. The only stop he would make was a moment's pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and with wild cries of encouragement urged them to go further, urged them on to further exertions. Then through the darkness I could see a sort of patch of gray light ahead of us, as though there were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather springs and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level, and we appeared to fly along. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side, to frown down upon us. We were entering on the Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me with an earnestness which would take no denial. These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but These were certainly of an odd and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith with a kindly word and a blessing, and that strange mixture of fear, meaning movements, which I had seen outside the hotel at Bistritz, the sign of the cross and the guard against evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected, but though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept on for some time, and at last we saw before us the pass opening out on the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the darkness, but all was dark. The only light was the flickering rays of our own lamps, in which the steam from our hard-driven horses rose in a white cloud. We could see now the sandy road lying white before us, but there was on it no signs of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly in so low a tone, I thought it was an hour less than the time. Then turning to me, he said in German worse than my own, "There is no carriage here. The Herr is not expected after all. He will now come on to Bukovina and return tomorrow or the next day. Better the next day." Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants and a universal crossing of themselves, a caleche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them that the horses were coal-black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight, as he turned to us. He said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply, "The English Herr was in a hurry," to which the stranger replied, "That is why, I suppose, you wished him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to another the line from Berger's Lenore, "Den die Toten reiten schnell," for the dead travel fast. The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned his face away at the same time putting out his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the Herr's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding alacrity my bags were handed out and put in the caleche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the caleche was close alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins. The horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam from the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected against it the figures of my late companions, crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses, and off they swept on their way to Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders and a rug across my knees, and the driver said, in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me take all care of you. There was a flask of Slivovitz, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat, if you should require it. I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely and not a little frightened. I think had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along. Then we made a complete turn and went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again, and so I took note of some salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what this all meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that, placed as I was, any protest would have had no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. By and by, however, as I was curious to know how time was passing, I struck a match, and by its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes of midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited with a sick feeling of suspense.
The choice of the parents has fallen on you. I do not know how you would look at it.
Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road, a long, agonized wailing as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another and another, till, borne on the wind which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side of us, began a louder and a sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them and whispered something in their ears, as I have heard of horse tamers doing, and with extraordinary effect, for under his caresses they became quite manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver again took his seat, and shaking his reins, started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed in with trees, which in places arched right over the roadway till we passed as through a tunnel. And again, great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing round on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head to left and right, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He at once checked the horses and, jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness.
So, what do you think about these killings?
I did not know what
Scary,
to do.
huh?
The less as the
You think
howling
those
of the
two
wolves
wolves
grew
would do something
closer.
like this?
But while I
don't believe it
wondered,
is
the
possible.
driver suddenly appeared
They've done
again, and
possible
without
but
a
fine
word
with
took his
me,
seat,
just like all
and
the
we
other
resumed our
wolves.
journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, and now looking back, it is like a sort of awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared so near the road that even in the darkness, once the flame appeared so near the road that even in the darkness around us, I could watch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illumine the place around it at all, and gathered a few stones, formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect. When he stood between me and the flame, he did not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker all the same.
Hey, thank you for your time.
This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me straining through the darkness. Then for a time there were no blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following in a moving circle. At last there came a time when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause of it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then
my name's
the
Gabriel
moon,
Knight. I'm an American
sailing
novelist.
through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling,
What can I do for you,
pine-clad
Mr.
rock.
Knight?
And by its light I saw
researching a
around
new
us
book,
a
and,
ring of wolves
I hear you're the
with
expert
white
in these
teeth
parts.
and lolling
Could you
red
spare a moment?
tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and
Please, sit
shaggy
down.
hair.
Thank you.
They were 100 times more terrible in the grim silence which held them than even when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It is only when a man feels himself
Could I
face
ask you
to
some
face
questions?
with such horrors that he can
Yes.
understand their true import. All at
don't
once,
mind if I
the
record
wolves
this for you?
began to howl as though the
That's fine.
moonlight had had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared and looked helplessly round with eyes that rolled in a way painful to see, but the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce
So,
to remain
you're
within
in
it.
charge of the zoo's
I
mammal
called to
division.
the coachman
Yes.
to come,
What kind of
for it
training do you
seemed to
need
me
for
that our
that, Doc?
only chance was to try to break out through the ring,
realize you
and to
Americans
aid his
hate
approach I
titles,
shouted
but
and beat
people
the side of the
refer to me as
caleche,
Head Doctor
hoping by the
Clean
noise
around
to
here.
scare the wolves
Head
from the
Doctor will
side
also
so as
do.
to give him a chance of reaching the trap.
Sorry.
How
I'm
he
a
came
doctorate
there,
from
I know
Heidelberg
not,
University,
but I
and I
heard his
feel
voice
you
raised in a
animal
tone of imperious
behaviorists.
command, and looking towards
Fascinating.
the sound, saw him stand in the roadway. As he swept his long arms, as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle, the wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then
I
a
see
heavy
you're
cloud
particularly
passed across the
interested in
face of the
wolves.
moon, so that we were again
Yes,
in
I'm
darkness.
quite well known for my wolf research.
When I could see again, the
must
driver
have
was
been
climbing
horrified
into
when
the
two of your
caleche,
wolves
and the
escaped
wolves
then.
disappeared. This was
Yes.
all so
been
strange
very
and uncanny
unsettling.
that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete
What kind
darkness,
of
for the
wolf
rolling
research
clouds
do you do,
obscured the
Head Doc?
moon. We kept
I
on
study
ascending,
wolf
with occasional
society
periods of quick
here
descent,
and in the wild.
but in the main always ascending.
Insight?
Suddenly I became conscious of the
Only
fact
that
that the
there's
driver
a
was in the act of pulling up the
purity to
horses in the
nature
courtyard
which human
of a vast
society
ruined
lacks.
castle, from whose tall black
Life,
windows came no ray of
reproduction, death.
sunlight, and whose broken...
In nature, there's a
We
purpose
cannot
to
let
it,
it interrupt us on
even
the
if that
last
purpose
sentence.
isn't pretty. We humans have
Suddenly,
forgotten our
I became
purpose.
conscious of the
have.
fact that the
Yes.
driver was in the act of
Does a
pulling up the horses
male
in the
lion say to the
courtyard of a
female,
vast
"I'm
ruined
sorry, but
castle,
I'm afraid
from
to
whose
make a
tall
commitment"?
black windows came
Does
no
a
ray
female
of light,
wolf
and whose broken
run off and leave her
battlements showed a
offspring to the
jagged
male
line
because she wants to mate with
against
another
the
wolf?
moonlit sky.
Do hyenas need psychotherapy
And that
because
concludes
they
chapter 1
are
of
guilty
Dracula.
about their
I will
thieving
try
nature?
to figure out what happened
You have
today,
a
why our
point.
connection kept dropping, but I hope you were able to continue with the
Which
story. It
I'm
seemed to
afraid
me,
I have
from
overstated.
past
Not
experience
at
with the
all.
dropping like that,
Do you
you basically
fellow
lose about a
scientists share your
second, and so
views?
I try to continue by reading the last sentence back
Not
before the
often,
break
no.
happens. So I'll try to figure that out. Hopefully we can stop that from happening again.
Fortunately,
But thank you for joining me
I
for
have
our
found
first
others
day
who
of
do.
Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is a relatively shorter book, especially compared to our last read. It's only 27 chapters, and so we should be finishing just a few days before Halloween. My goal is to just read one chapter a day, so again, we can stretch this out to as close to Halloween as possible. But thank
was
you for
speaking
joining
with
for
one of your
chapter 1
boys out front,
as Jonathan Harker
Greg,
journeyed on his
was
way
it?
to the home
No, there's
of
no
Count
Greg on
Dracula.
staff here.
We'll find
You
out
mean
what
Thomas?
happens more when he arrives
Thomas,
there. We'll
right.
continue tomorrow's
Anyway,
reading.
he's the one that
So
said to
thank you
talk
very
to you.
much. I look forward to
Because I
reading
was
more
wondering
with
if there
you.
was any way I could get a
Enjoy the
closer
rest
look
of
at
your
one of
day.
the wolves. For research?
Perhaps some blood tea.
I'm afraid this is not possible.
Take care.
We don't show
Bye-bye.
our wolves to anyone. We must protect what privacy
Hello everyone,
creatures
welcome
have.
back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library, and I'm happy to join you for day 2 of our Read Aloud Together
Guess that's
of
that.
Dracula by Bram Stoker. Yesterday we just read one chapter. We're going to just read one chapter every day. We're going to be able to space this one out
mind if we
nicely
talk
to take us
briefly about
over
the missing
really
wolf?
close to Halloween.
Is this relevant
and so
to your
I thought
book?
we'd start by enjoying
Oh,
some
yeah.
tea.
You see, wolves are major
Today's tea
characters
is
in
called
my new
Berry
novel.
Blossom. As you can see, it's
This
another
case is
beautiful
quite unusual, isn't
blood
it?
red
I
kind of
suppose it
tea.
is.
Hi Helen, good to see you.
Very well.
Let me
Actually, I know
press
very
this one
little
down.
about the case, but I will tell you what I can.
I hope you guys are enjoying something
Appreciate it.
wonderful today. I hope your day is going beautifully. Let's see. How's my day been going so far? I think it's
How
been
long
good.
have the wolves been
It's
missing?
weird how the days sort of blur into each other, but yeah, it's
It's
been a
been
nice day
about
so far.
2
And of
months.
course, better now that we're reading together.
Whew, that's a while, isn't it? Strange the police haven't seen
I
hide nor
like this
hair
one
of
a
them.
lot. The berry flavor
So to
just
speak.
again adds that illusion of sweetness, even
Believe
though it's
me, your
not sugared at
sentiment
all.
is shared by the
I haven't
German
added any
public.
sweetener to it, but it has that just sweet flavor because of the fruit. It's really a lovely tea. Okay, so let's let that one get cool, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened in Chapter 1 of Dracula. I did want to show you
Do
though
you
a
think
couple
the
of
zoo
extra
wolves are
editions.
responsible for the mutilation
One of my
killing?
coworkers
That
brought in
is
2
yet
of
to
her
be
editions
proven.
from home.
Because
And
I've
of
been
course,
wondering,
one of them I left with her.
what else could it be? Wild
I'm just going to
wolves,
share.
maybe?
This is another one that we had on our shelf here at the
Unfortunately,
library, just in
there
our
are very
paperback
few
classic
wild
section.
wolves left in
But again,
Germany.
a couple little
Most were killed
illustrations.
off by hunters
One of the other
decades ago.
ones that my coworker brought in, of course I don't have it with
A
me, so I
few
can't show you.
remain
It was
in the
beautiful.
Alps.
It had every
But
chapter
so
heading
close
was
to
written
a
in
city
blood
like
red,
Munich,
and
it's
so that was
highly
nice.
unlikely.
But this
Any other suggestions?
this is the beautiful one. This is the
I'm afraid
annotated edition, the
I'm
new
as
annotated
confused as
edition of
anyone, Mr.
Dracula,
Knight.
edited by Leslie S. Klinger. It is stunning. Oh no, we just had a little disconnect. I hope this isn't like yesterday where we get disconnected several times. But let's hope for the best. I'm a little tempted to
What I
start
don't
over
see is
because
why
I
wolves,
think I identified
if
yesterday
the
with the
killers
problem,
are
but I might have
wolves,
forgotten to
why
fix
wolves would
it. So
attack
let's hope.
humans.
Let's keep going.
Wolves
let's keep
are
going. We just got
predators.
one more chapter of this, and then
Most
if it
carnivores
does
are
keep
potential
disconnecting today, I really will
man-eaters
try to
given
fix it by
hunger
tomorrow.
enough.
Sorry. So I was going to say
and
this
opportunity.
beautiful annotated edition. It is
Weren't the zoo
stunning.
wolves raised
And
among
what's
humans?
interesting about it is
Yes.
it takes. Let's just take a
And
look at chapter
therefore,
1.
they are not afraid of
For
us.
this first section of chapter 1, what we read yesterday, here's the first
suppose.
couple of paragraphs, like the first 2.5 paragraphs. It goes through
How
17
does a wolf
footnotes,
choose its
which on
victim?
the other half of the page,
Have you ever
it
heard of
gives
the language of
first
death?
first half of one footnote. Then it
You
has
may
a
have
full
heard that
another.
wolves often choose the young, the old, or the sick as prey. Until
dear,
recently,
I went
many
too far.
thought this was some sort
There's a
of
full another
natural
1,
selection
2,
going on, survival of
3,
the fittest.
4,
But now some of us are
5,
finding it is much more complicated
6
than that.
more pages
We have observed,
of
for
annotations and
example,
footnotes just explaining
wolves
how
surround
the
a sick moose
different
cow.
bits
The
about
creature was helpless,
what was mentioned
yet
in those
she
2.5
stood up
paragraphs.
and
So
glared back at her
it's a
would-be
really
killers.
rich description.
The wolves dispersed.
I was telling
Or a
Rebecca,
healthy bull
my coworker who
who
brought this in,
ran off
that what I
alone
think
when
I'm
he
going to try
sensed
doing
wolves,
is
making
reading
himself
over
an
the
easy
chapter
target
with
for
you
no
in the
apparent
standard
reason.
form, and then going back and reviewing the annotated
Researchers
edition.
now believe that there is
Sorry,
a kind
the
of
disconnect. They're really
primal
annoying.
language
To see if there's
going
anything
on.
in particular that we need to
I
add
am
in
death,
to explain.
the wolf
So let's
says.
go
Are
ahead and
you
do a
ready
quick
to
review
go?
of yesterday's reading, and if there's anything
And the victim
special from
by
the
its
annotation, I'll
actions
go ahead and share that with you
says,
as we go.
Yes,
so basically,
I am ready, or no,
in chapter
you will
1,
not
it was
take me
taken
now.
from Jonathan Harker's journal.
What if
Jonathan
the prey
Harker is our
doesn't know
original
the
narrator
language
here
of
in the
death?
book. We're going to have multiple narrators because
This is a
the
big
entire book
problem,
is actually
particularly for
told
the
from
wolves.
the. It's framed as being
When wolves come
excerpts
across
from various
domesticated
characters'
animals who
journals
do
or
not know
diaries
how
or
to
even
play the
newspaper
game,
articles. And
they're
so
confused.
therefore we are getting
They start slaughtering
multiple
and
narrators,
they have no
each
sense for when to
sharing their
stop.
perspective on the
That
story.
is why farmers
and again,
have hunted
we have to
wolves
keep
to
in mind too
extinction
how
in most
truthful
parts
they
of
may
the
or may not
world.
be being as we go along.
Well,
because again, Jonathan Harker is
certainly gives me
our
something
first
to think
narrator.
about.
We can only hope he's being as honest and forthright in his account as he can be. So it starts out with Jonathan Harker is
Can't think of
on
what
his
else to
way.
ask him.
He's an attorney. He's English. He's on his way to visit a client in Transylvania. This client is named Count Dracula, and he has instructions to stay in a town in Bistritz, and then he's going to catch the conveyance that will take him over to
walkie-talkie.
Castle Dracula the following day.
Didn't Thomas have one like that?
So what happens is, as he's getting ready to leave from Bistritz, he informs the proprietors of the hotel where he's staying that he is on his way to visit Castle Dracula. And the woman who is the proprietress of the hotel is basically
Thank you for your time, Doctor.
Not at all.
She doesn't advise him to go, and specifically she doesn't want him to go that day. Because she says, when it is the eve of St. George's Day, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world have full sway. And so the implication is that the vampires and the demons will have, you know, a better ability to reach out to the regular human world.
Ah, Mr. Knight.
And so he is in more jeopardy. She gives him a crucifix to wear,
again.
even though he's
Not a
not very
problem.
religious. He takes that from her just out of respect. And when the following day, on May the 5th, he's ready to go and take the coach on the journey to, when he's ready to go to Castle Dracula, he is, he hears the other people
Thank
on
you for your time,
in the
Doctor.
coach
Not
talking
at
about
all.
him. And basically they're saying, you know, something about, let's see, if I can get to the right words. He's saying something like about Satan and hell and witches and werewolves or vampires. And he makes a note, which I found super amusing, that he must remember to ask the Count about these superstitions. So they make signs to ward off the evil eye. And in fact, the coachman tries to hurry the trip over, so he gets there an hour earlier beyond when he was expected to arrive, so that he can say, oh look, there's no carriage here to pick. He says there's no carriage here to pick you up, so instead of getting out, you should really just continue on with me and maybe come back the next day or the day after. So the coachman and the people in the carriage are trying to protect Jonathan Harker from being taken in by Count Dracula. But instead, a carriage shows up, and the carriage is driven by a driver who is quite dramatic in his appearance. He has a hard-looking mouth, very red lips, and sharp-looking teeth as white as ivory. Dun, dun, dun. And so this driver takes in Jonathan Harker, and they begin driving. On their way to Castle Dracula, they actually, it's kind of weird, they kill time for a while driving around, and they see blue lights in the distance. The driver gets out and he goes and does something, and then he comes back. Now, what the Annotated edition says, and again, what it implies is that there's a superstition that on this night, after midnight, there are treasures that appear and they can be illuminated by blue lights. And after midnight, they can be taken by creatures of evil, versus before midnight, the treasures, the hidden treasures that only appear twice per year, could only be taken by creatures of good. And so the implication is that Dracula is actually searching out treasures. And so finally, as they're heading back, they hear the sounds of dogs and then wolves howling into the night. And Jonathan Harker is quite frightened by this. And finally, they're able to beat them away. And actually, the driver, as he swept out his long arms as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle, the wolves fell back and back further still. So again, the implication is that the driver, we can probably guess it's Count Dracula, but we're not certain yet. This driver has the ability to drive back the wolves, so he has some control over them. Finally, they head on back. They head over to the castle. And so now we're going to continue to Chapter 2, which is a continuation of Jonathan Harker's journal. All right.
My age. Well,
fortified with some tea and go into our story.
Oh, me? No,
Chapter
just
2,
never had a family
Jonathan
lawyer
Harker's
before. I guess I was
Chapter
expecting
2,
that
Jonathan
long or
Harker's
something.
journal continued. 5 May.
So you
I
finally
must have been
decided to
asleep,
visit
for
Munich,
certainly
yes?
if I had been fully awake, I
Yep,
must
I'm
have
here
noticed the
doing some
approach of such a
research.
remarkable place.
Anything
In the
at all I can
gloom,
do to
the
help.
courtyard
My
looked of
secretary
considerable
and I
size,
are
and as several dark ways led from it under great round arches, it perhaps seemed bigger than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand
I
to
suppose
assist
that's
me to
your
alight.
name on the marquee.
Again, I could not but
I'm
notice
sorry.
his prodigious
Overground,
strength.
Hoffman and
His
Champ.
hand actually seemed like a steel
this is
vice
my
that could have
grandfather's
crushed
firm,
mine if he had
and just a
chosen.
junior partner.
Then he took my traps and placed
I
them on the
put
ground
my
beside me as I
son
stood
into a
close
family
to a
with
great
no
door,
I was
old and
chosen
studded
because
with
of my
large
English.
iron nails
I took
and
my
set
law
in a
training at
projecting
Harper, you see.
doorway of massive stone. I could
Hell,
see
son,
even in the dim
I
light
don't
that
care
the
if you're a
stone was
junior
massively
partner or a
carved,
mail clerk.
but that the carving had
You
been
just glad
made,
somebody taking care of the
but that the
paperwork.
carving had been much
you know,
worn by
the
time
firm
and
has the
weather.
utmost respect
As I
for
stood,
visitors.
the driver jumped
I will
again
do
into
everything
his seat
possible
and
on your
shook the
behalf.
reins. The horses started
Appreciate it.
forward, and trap and all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign.
Shouldn't have any
Through
problems.
these frowning walls and a
You've picked up
dark
little
window,
German, haven't you?
excuse me.
You've been here
Through these
what,
frowning walls and
most of
dark
you?
window openings, it was not likely that my voice could penetrate.
I have been
The
here
time
that
I
long,
waited seemed endless,
but my faculty
and I
for
felt
languages
doubts and
leaves
fears
some to
crowding
be
upon me.
Well,
What sort of place
most
did I
Germans
come
speak a little
to,
English
and among
if
what
you
kind of
need
people?
anything translated,
What
you
sort
can
of grim
always bring
adventure
it to
was
me.
it on which I had embarked? Was this a customary incident in the life of a solicitor's clerk sent out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk.
Yes.
Mina would
We
not
had the
like
difficult
that.
task proving that you were a
Solicitor.
legitimate
For
blood
just
heir,
before
but
leaving
then
London,
once
I
I
got
settled
word that
down.
my examination was successful,
Must tell
and
you,
I am
we
now
were
a
beginning to get
full-blown
quite worried
solicitor.
about the Ritter holdings.
I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if
We've
I
had a
were
policy,
awake.
my grandfather
It all
really,
seemed like a
of,
horrible nightmare to
waiving
me,
our fees
and I
for
expected
important
that I
old
should
accounts,
suddenly
but
awake and find myself at
unfortunately the
home,
government
with
is
the
not so
dawn
generous.
struggling in through the windows,
It was
as I
quite a
had now
miracle
and
when
again
you
felt in
appeared,
the
Mr.
morning
Knight.
after a day of overwork. But my flesh answered the pinching test, and my eyes were not to be deceived. I was indeed awake and among the Carpathians.
Do you know anything about the mutilation?
All I could do now was to be
Mutilation
patient
killings?
and to
Well, no,
wait the coming of the
Oh my
morning.
God, Hannah, is
Just
that
as
what
I
you
had
were
come to this
searching here,
conclusion,
Munich?
I heard a heavy
I
step
read your last
approaching
book,
behind
you
the
know.
great door and saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was
That's above and beyond the Call of Duty.
Then there
Not
was
at
the
all. I
sound of
love
rattling
detective
chains
fiction.
and the clanking of
Philip
massive
Marlowe,
bolts
all that.
drawn back. A key was turned with a loud
Voodoo
grating
murders.
noise of long disuse,
That was based
and the
on a
great
real case,
door
was it not?
swung back.
Loosely.
Within stood a tall old
You know
man,
nothing about the
clean-shaven
mutilation
save
count.
for a long white mustache,
Well,
and clad in
only that
black
those
from
missing
head to
wolves
foot,
have attacked
without a
and
single
partially
speck of
eaten
color
people
about
out
him
in the country.
anywhere.
If you
He
are
held in
researching
his
this
hand
case,
an
Hannah, I
antique
would be
silver
happy
lamp,
to assist.
in which the flame
Sounds
burned without
exciting.
chimney or globe of any kind, throwing
You
long,
don't plan on
quivering
getting
shadows
too,
as it flickered in the draught
close
of
to
the
the
open
actual
door.
wolves, I hope.
The old man motioned me in with
rather
his
not.
right hand with a courtly gesture,
Thanks for your
saying in
offer.
excellent English
May
but
take
with
you
a
up on
strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will."
Do you know anyone with a background in animal
He made no
biology?
motion of stepping to meet me,
biology
but stood
for
like a
your research.
statue, as though his
Right.
gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I stepped over the threshold,
have
he
one
moved
client
impulsively
who's a professor at
forward,
the
and
university.
holding out his hand,
Maybe you know
grasped
someone
mine
there.
with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he
Yeah,
said,
Dr. Schweiger,
"Welcome to
bitte."
my house. Come freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring."
Herr Dr. Schweiger,
The strength of the handshake
Ja.
was so much
Wie geht's
akin to
Ihnen?
that which I had noticed in the driver,
Ich bin's
whose
überdacht.
face I had not
Ich
seen,
bräuchte den
that
Namen
for a
eines
moment I
Experten in
doubted if it were
Tierbiologie.
not the same person to whom I was speaking.
Oh.
So to make sure, I said interrogatively,
das könnte funktionieren.
"Count Dracula?"
Ja,
He bowed in a courtly way as he replied,
Ja,
"I
sehr
am
gut.
Dracula, and I bid you
herzlichen
welcome,
Dank.
Mr. Harker, to my house.
Genau.
Come in. The night air is
Auf
chill,
Wiedersehen.
and you must need to eat
So.
and rest." As he
Gut.
was speaking, he put
There
the
is a
lamp
lab
on a
at the
bracket on the
University
wall,
Biology
and
Department.
stepping
They
out,
may
took
be
my
able to help
luggage.
you there.
He had
Just
carried
tell
it
me
in
about
before I could
Schweiger
forestall
something.
him.
Sounds
I
great.
protested, but
Thanks.
he insisted. "Nay, sir, you are my guest. It is late, and my people are not available. Let me see
I don't
to your
have anything
comfort
else to
myself."
say right now.
He insisted on carrying my traps along the passage, and then up to a great winding stair, and along another great passage, on whose stone floor our steps rang heavily. At the end of this,
Yeah.
he threw open a heavy
Guess I'd
door,
better get
and I
going.
rejoiced to
Well,
see within a
enjoy your
well-lit
stay.
room in which a table was spread for supper, and on whose mighty hearth a great fire of logs, freshly replenished, flamed and flared. The Count halted, putting down my bags, closed the door, and crossing the room opened another door, which led into a small octagonal room lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom well lighted and warmed with another log fire, also added to but lately, for the top logs were fresh, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying, before he closed the door, "You will need,
I'd give it a
after your
shot,
journey,
but I don't
to
speak the
refresh
language."
yourself by making your toilette. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth and the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, I discovered that I was half famished with hunger. So making a hasty toilette, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood on one side of the great fireplace, leaning against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand to the table and said, "I pray you be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already, and I do not sup." I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it. Let's go back. I handed to him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted to me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then, with a charming smile, he handed it to me to read. One passage of it, at least, gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am a constant sufferer, forbids absolutely any traveling on my part for some time to come. But I am happy to say I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend to you when you will during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters." The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to at once on an excellent roast chicken. This, with some cheese and a salad and a bottle of Old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating it, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and by my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and begun to smoke a cigar which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him of a very marked physiognomy. His face was a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead, and hair growing scantily round the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy moustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm, though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor.
Of course, but it would help to have a general idea.
Hitherto I had
not
noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they had seemed rather white and fine. But seeing them now close to me, I could not but notice they were rather coarse-rod, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were long and fine, and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile, which showed more than he had yet done his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window, I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened, I heard, as if from down below in the valley, the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression in my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your
If the
bedroom is
other
all
species
ready,
forbid
and
a
tomorrow you
very
shall sleep
big
as late as you
dog,
will.
perhaps?
I have to be away
You see,
till
the
the
puppet
afternoon,
looks like a
so
wolf,
sleep
but that
well
doesn't mean
and
that the
dream
whole
well.
animal looks like
With
a
a
wolf.
courteous bow, he opened for me himself the door to the octagonal room, and I
I need
entered
to
my
show him
bedroom.
what I've got.
I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. 7 May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept till late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped and found a cold breakfast laid out, with coffee kept hot by the pot being placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table on which was written, "I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D." I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell, so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are round me. The table service is of gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains and upholstery of the chairs and sofas and the hangings of my bed are of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still, in none of the rooms is there a mirror. There is not even a toilette glass on my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle except the howling of wolves. Some time after I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it, I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, book, newspaper, or even writing materials, so I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine I tried, but found it locked. In the library I found, to my great delight, a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were of very recent date. The books were of the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geology, law, all relating to England and English life and customs and manners. There were even such books of reference as the London Directory, the Red and Blue books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Navy, the Army and Navy lists, and, it somehow gladdened my heart to see it, the Law list. While I was looking at the books, the door opened, and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way, and hoped that I had had a good night's rest. Then he went on, "I am glad you found your way in here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These companions," and he laid his hand on some of the books, "have been good friends to me, and for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as yet I only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I look that I know it to speak." "But, Count," I said, "you know and speak English thoroughly." He bowed gravely. "I thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but yet I fear that I am but a little way on the road I would travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them." "Indeed," I said, "you speak excellently." "Not so," he answered. "Well, I know that, did I move and speak in your London, none there are who would not know me for a stranger. That is not enough for me. Here I am noble, I am boyar. The common people know me, and I am master. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and to know not is to care not for. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pauses in his speaking if he hears my words. "Ha-ha, stranger! I have been so long master that I would be master still, or at least that none other should be master of me. You come to me not alone, as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter, to tell me all about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest here with me a while, so that by your talking I may learn the English intonation, and I would that you tell me when I make error, even of the smallest, in my speaking. I am sorry that I had to be away so long today, but you will, I know, forgive one who has so many important matters in hand." Of course I said all I could about being willing, and asked if I might come into that room when I chose. He answered, "Yes, certainly," and added, "You may go anywhere you wish in the castle, except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. There is reason that all things are as they are, and did you see with my eyes and know with my knowledge, you would perhaps better understand." I said I was sure of this, and then he went on, "We are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. Nay, from what you have told me of your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be." This led to much conversation, and as it was evident that he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake, I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me or come within my notice. Sometimes he sheered off the subject or turned the conversation by pretending not to understand, but generally he answered all I asked most frankly. Then as time went on and I had got somewhat bolder, I asked him of some of the strange things of the preceding night, as for instance, why the coachman went to the places where he had seen the blue flames. He then explained to me that it was commonly believed that on a certain night of the year, last night in fact, when all evil spirits are supposed to have unchecked sway, a blue flame is seen over any place where treasure has been concealed. "That treasure has been hidden," he went on, "in the region through which you came last night. There can be but little doubt, for it was the ground fought over for centuries by the Wallachian, the Saxon, and the Turk. Why, there is hardly a foot of soil in all this region that has not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots, or invaders. In old days there were stirring times, when the Austrian and the Hungarian came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women, the aged and the children too, and waited their coming on the rocks above the passes, that they might sweep destruction on them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, for whatever there was had been sheltered in the friendly soil." "But how," said I, "can it have remained so long undiscovered, when there is a sure index to it if men will but take the trouble to look?" The Count smiled, and as his lips ran back over his gums, the long, sharp canine teeth showed out strangely. He answered, "Because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames only appear on one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if he can help it, stir without his doors.
There's some carbon
And dear
on the
sir,
back,
even
but I
if he
can't make
did,
out what it says.
he would not know what to do. Why, even the peasant that you tell me of who marked the place of the flame would not know where to look in daylight, even for his own work. Even you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find those places again?" "There you are right," I said. "I know no more than the dead where even to look for them." Then we drifted into other matters. "Come," he said at last, "tell me of London and of the house which you have procured for me." With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard a rattling of china and silver in the next room, and as I passed through, noticed that the table had been cleared and the lamp lit, for it was by this time deep into the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study or library, and I found the Count lying on the sofa, reading, of all things in the world, an English Bradshaw's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything, and asked me a myriad questions about the place and its surroundings. He clearly had studied beforehand all he could get on the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently at the end knew very much more than I did. When I remarked this, he answered, "Well, but, my friend, is it not needful that I should? When I go there I shall be all alone, and my friend Harker Jonathan— nay, pardon me, I fall into my country's habit of putting your patronymic first. My friend Jonathan Harker will not be by my side to correct and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working at papers of the law with my other friend, Peter Hawkins. So, we went thoroughly into the business of the purchase of the estate at Purfleet. When I had told him the facts and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter with them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I had come across so suitable a place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. At Purfleet, on a by-road, I came across just such a place as seemed to be required, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It was surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built of heavy stones, and has not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy old oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the old Quatreface, as the house is four-sided.
I need to pick a tape.
Agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains in all some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall above mentioned. There are many trees on it, which makes it in places gloomy, and there is a deep, dark-looking pond or small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream. The house is very large, and of all periods back, I should say, to medieval times, for one part is of stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up and heavily barred with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key of the door leading to it from the house, but I have taken with my Kodak views of it from various points. The house had been added to, but in a very straggling way, and I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great.
I've done enough splicing off cleaning
There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house only recently added to, and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds.
I have to load a tape first.
When I had finished, he said,
There's no point
I am
listening
glad
to a
that it
blank
is
tape.
old and big. I myself am of an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to think that our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, nor the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters, which please the young and gay. I am no longer young, and my heart, through weary years of mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken. The shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and the shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I may. Somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord, or else it was that his cast of face made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me, asking me to pull all my papers together. He was some little time away, and I began to look at some of the books around me. One was an atlas, which I found opened naturally to England, as if that map had been much used. On looking at it, I found in certain places little rings marked, and on examining these, I noticed that one was near London on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter and Whitby on the Yorkshire coast. It was the better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha," he said, "still at your books? Good, but you must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm, and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready on the table. Let's go back a bit, because it disconnected again. He took my arm, and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready on the table. The Count again excused himself. The Count again excused himself as he had dined out on his being away from home. But he sat as on the previous night and chatted whilst I ate. After supper I smoked, as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject, hour after.
Prince Andre looked at her sternly. A spiteful look suddenly came to Prince Andre's face. He said nothing to her, but avoiding her eyes, looked at her forehead and hair with such scorn that the French woman blushed and left without saying anything. When he approached his sister's room, the princess was already awake, and her merry little voice could be heard through the open door, hurriedly sending out one word after another. She was talking as if, after a long absence, she wanted to make up for lost time. Non, mais figurez-vous la vieille comtesse Zuboff avec des fausses boucles et les bouches pleines de fausses dents comme elle laissait le pavé. Défaire le anis. Ha ha ha, Marie. 5 times already with other people, Prince Andre had heard exactly the same phrases about the Comtesse Zubov and the same laughter from his wife. He quietly went into the room. The princess, round, rosy, with her work in her hands, was sitting in an armchair and talking non-stop, telling over her Petersburg memories and even phrases. Prince Andre went to her, stroked her head, and asked whether she had rested from the journey. She made a reply and went on with the small talk. The coach and six was standing at the porch. Outside it was a dark autumn night. The coachman could not see the shafts of the carriage.
All right, let's see. Chapter 37. The two gentlemen left Rosings the next morning, and Mr. Collins,
Hi.
having been
Sonnet
waiting near the
94.
lodgings to make them his departing obeisance,
They
was able
that
to
have
bring
power
home
to
the pleasing
hurt
intelligence
and will do
of their
none,
appearing in very good health,
that do not
and
do
as
the
tolerable
things
spirits as could
they
be
most
expected
do show,
after the melancholy
who,
scene so lately gone
moving
through at
others,
Rosings.
are themselves
To Rosings,
as stone,
he then hastened
unmoved, cold,
and saw
and
Lady
to
Catherine,
temptation
daughter,
slow.
and on his return
They
brought back
rightly
with
do
great satisfaction
inherit
a message
heaven's
from the lady,
graces and husband
that she felt
nature's
herself
riches
so
from
dull
expense.
as to make her very
They
desirous of
are
having
the
more to dine with
lords
her.
and owners of their faces.
Elizabeth could not see Lady
Others,
Catherine without
but
recollecting
stewards
that, had
of
she
their
chosen, that
excellence.
she might by this time have been presented
The
to her
summer's
as her
flower
future niece,
is to
nor
the
could she
summer
think,
sweet,
without
though
a
to
smile,
itself
of what her ladyship's
it only
indignation.
live and die.
What would she have said?
But if that
How
flower
would she have behaved?
with base infection meet the basest weed, outbraves his
Their
dignity.
first subject was the
For sweetest things turn sours like deeds. Lilies that fester smell far worse than tough talking.
I was eating because I was stressed out, candy bars and chips and donuts, gaining weight. But since I started...
Hi. I would like all my friends in the UK to know that my new film, A Life with Music, is now streaming in the UK on every platform.
After hour, I felt that it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as the long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing that chill which comes over one at the coming of the dawn, which is like, in its way, the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death die generally at the change to the dawn or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who has when tired and tied as it were to his post experienced this change in the atmosphere can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of a cock coming up with preternatural shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula, jumping to his feet, said, "Why, there is the morning again. How remiss I am to let you stay up so long. You must make your conversation regarding my dear new country of England less interesting, so that I may not forget how time flies by us."
Thomas?
And with a courtly bow, he quickly left me. I went into my room and drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. My window opened into the courtyard. All I could see was the warm gray of quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again and have written of this day.
Ja, okay, Herr Doktor.
8 May. I began to fear, as I wrote in this book, that I was getting too diffuse, but now I am glad that I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place, and all in it, that I cannot but feel uneasy.
I'm afraid I was just about to
There
leave.
is something so strange about this place and all in
all
it
right.
that I cannot but
Perhaps
feel
another day.
uneasy.
Perhaps.
I wish I were safe out of it,
Good luck
or that
with
I had
your
never
work
come.
tonight.
It may be that this strange night existence
And
is
for you?
telling on me, but would that were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he... I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place.
That would be swell.
Let me be prosaic so far as facts can be. It will help me to bear up, and imagination must not run riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand, or seem to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window and was just beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard the Count's voice say to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time, there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it, except myself.
Hey, girl.
This was startling, and coming on the top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase that vague feeling of uneasiness which I always have when the Count is near. But at the instant I saw the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did so half round to look for some sticking. Plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with the sort of demonic fury, and he said,
"Stop that!"
When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demonic fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it." And opening the heavy window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave unless in my watch case or the bottom of the shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere, so I breakfasted alone. It is strange that as yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle.
Hello, Mr. Knight.
I did a little exploring in the castle. Sorry about all the interruptions. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood, there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle is on the very edge of a terrific precipice. A stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can reach is a sea of green treetops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here and there are silver threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in heart to describe beauty, for when I had seen the view, I explored further. Doors, 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 everywhere,
This
and
is
all
not the
locked
same as the other
and
head.
bolted.
It
In
isn't.
no place, save from the windows in the castle
very
walls, is there an available exit.
Maybe
The castle
both, though.
is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. Okay, so that concludes Chapter 2. Tomorrow we'll continue with more of Jonathan Harker's journal set in Castle Dracula. And again, I will try to fix these connection issues we're having. I'm so sorry it keeps dropping out, and I hope it's not too annoying when I go back a sentence so that you guys won't miss anything. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you're having a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow for more Dracula. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey friends! Hi! It's Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. We're trying something new today because I forgot my phone at home, so we're using the computer. And so today is day 3 of our read-along together of our read-along together of Dracula. So day 3, chapter 3 is going to be fabulous. Clearly, I'm a little discombobulated today. I apologize.
I don't know what else to
So
show
let's
him.
start out with some tea. Tea is always a good thing to help settle the nerves, whether you are realizing just a moment before live reading that you forgot your phone at home, or whether you are perhaps getting to know a vampire and quite feeling rather freaked out by the whole experience. So today my tea is a loose leaf Earl Grey tea. It is the Earl Grey de la Creme, which is a lovely Earl Grey. It has a little bit of vanilla flavor added to it, and it's delightful. It's a really fun tea. I like this one a lot. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with a discussion about yesterday's chapter, and then we'll get into chapter 3, which I peeked ahead just a tiny bit. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try really hard not to peek ahead anymore, but it was so good. Okay, chapter 2, Jonathan Harker's journal. We're continuing a few chapters of Jonathan Harker. We're going to have 4 days of Jonathan Harker's journal. And yesterday's chapter dealt with May 5th and May 6th, I believe it was. And basically in this one, it starts out with Jonathan saying how he has arrived at Castle Dracula, the home of Count Dracula, and that just the house is kind of unusual. He speaks a bit with the Count of Monte Cristo. They hear the wolves howling outside, and he mysteriously says, "Listen to them, the children of the night, what music they make," which I'd heard that quote before from Dracula, and I thought he was actually referring to other vampires rather than to wolves. So I hadn't realized. I also realized I've never seen a classic Dracula film. I've just seen things including vampires and making allusion to Dracula. So this is going to be wonderful. We're all going to get really more knowledgeable about Dracula by the end of this reading. Let's see. So on his entry for May 7th, it's kind of interesting too because he stays up all night talking with Dracula. He wakes up rather late the following day, and then he has a big breakfast, and he's all alone in the house. He finds the library. Yay, everyone loves the library. He finds the library to his great delight. And he finds books and magazines and things like that.
I don't think she speaks much English.
And in fact, it
Besides,
turns out
she only
that
wants to talk
Count
about wild
Dracula has
sausages.
been rather assiduously learning a lot about England, because when he goes to live at his new home, he wants to be fluent in the language and just really knowledgeable about what it's like to live in London. And so he talks about the city with Jonathan Harker, and things are going well.
How are you?
The next day, though, things get rather weird in a wonderful way for us as readers. Not so much for Jonathan Harker. When he wakes up, he admits he feels uneasy. He's shaving in the morning, and he suddenly feels the hand of the Count on his shoulder. But when he looks in the mirror, he does not see the reflection of the Count. And again, he sort of does that whole thing where he looks behind him, he sees the Count, but he looks in the mirror, he does not see the Count. So we know it's because he's a vampire, and vampire reflections don't show, at least in this world, in mirrors. And so, but Jonathan Harker is rather confused by what's going on. He just thinks it's something weird. In the confusion, he cuts himself, and blood drips down his chin. When that happens, the Count suddenly gets, his eyes seem to blaze with a demonic fury. He reaches for Jonathan Harker's throat, but when he grabs him, his hand touches the chain of the crucifix, which makes him step back, and he basically says, take care of yourself. When you cut yourself, it can be more dangerous than you think in this country. So I guess it might be safer to cut yourself when you're not in the home of a vampire. He then takes the little mirror that Jonathan Harker was using to shave with and says, this is the problem. It was vanity. You shouldn't have such a thing. And he literally throws it out the window and destroys Jonathan Harker's mirror. So from there,
I don't have anything else to say right now.
There's a little bit about, him eating breakfast, and then after breakfast, he goes out to look around. And as he looks, he sees this beautiful view, but then when he explores the house a bit more, he just finds door after door after door of locked doors. And previously the Count had told him, you're welcome to explore any room of the house, except the rooms with locked doors. So the chapter 2 ended with him saying, the castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. So, really dramatic. Let's find out what happens in chapter 3, where we continue with Jonathan Harker's journal. When I found that I was a prisoner, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all other feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly, as I have ever done anything in my life, and began to think over what was best to be done. I am thinking still, and as yet have come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing only am I certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am in prison, and as he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it, he would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, and my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived, like a baby, by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits, and if the latter be so, I need, and shall need, all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut, and knew that the Count had returned. He did not come at once into the library, so I went cautiously to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there were no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else in the castle. It must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves as he did by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all the people at Bistritz and on the coach had some terrible fear for me? What meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good, good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing that I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should in a time of loneliness and trouble be of help. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Some time, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight, he may talk of himself if I turn the conversation that way. I must be very careful, however, not to awake his suspicion.
I don't have anything else to say right now.
Midnight. I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvania history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present to them all. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar, the pride of his house and name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. He seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke and walked about the room, pulling his great white mustache and grasping anything on which he laid his hands, as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Skellies have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the people thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches, who, expelled from Scythia, had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools! Fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it a wonder that we were a conquering race? That we were proud? That when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier? That the Honfoglalas was completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Skellies were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkeyland. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard, for as the Turks say, water sleeps, and enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kasova, when the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down through the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, who as voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them. Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired that other of his race, who in a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkeyland, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that he thought only of himself? Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when after the Battle of Mohawks we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders, for our spirit would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young sir, the Skellies, the Zekalies, and the Dracula as their heart's blood, their brains, and their swords, can boast a record that mushroom growths like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach.
I'd give
The
it a
warlike
shot,
days
but I
are
don't
over.
speak the language.
Blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are as a tale that is told.
54
It
demon
was by
scraps.
this time close on morning, and we went to bed. Memo. This diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. 12 May. Let me begin with facts, bare, meager facts, verified by books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences which will have to rest on my own observation or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began by asking me questions on legal matters and on the doing of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters I had been examined in at Lincoln's Inn.
Dr. Klingman?
There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or sometime be useful to me. First, he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wished, but that it would not be wise to have more than 1 solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that to change would be certain to mitigate against his interest. Against his interest.
Tell me more.
He seemed thoroughly to understand and went on to ask if there would be any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and another to look after shipping, in case local help were needed in a place far from the home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully so that I might not by any chance mislead him, and he said, I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me through your good self my place at London. Good. Now, here let me say frankly, lest you should think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far off from London, instead of some one resident there, that my motive was that no local interest might be served save my wish only, and as one of London residents might, perhaps, have some purpose of himself or friend to serve, I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labors should be only to my interest. Now, suppose I, who have much of affairs, wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover.
And what family
Might it not be that it could with more ease be done by consigning to one in these ports?
I've heard
I
of
answered
the
that
name.
certainly it would
Can
be
you
most
prove
easy,
you're a direct
but that we
descendant?
solicitors had a system of
No, but just
agency,
take
one
my
for the
word
other,
for it.
so
No.
that local work
Do
could
you
be
have
done
proof?
locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his
I
wishes
wouldn't
carried out
mind
by
going
him
back
without
there,
further
but
trouble.
somebody...
But, said he,
I wouldn't
I
mind
could be
going
at
back
liberty
there,
to
but
direct
somebody's
myself.
blocking the way.
Is it not so? Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said, and then went on to ask about the means of making consignments, and the forms to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained all these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. When he had settled himself on these points of which we had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by the books available, he suddenly
I
stood
don't
up
think
and
she
said,
speaks much.
Have you written your first letter to our friend, Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other? It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. Then write now, my young friend, he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. Write to our friend and to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now. Do you wish me to stay so long? I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought. I desire it much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master, employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted, Is it not so?
Können Sie mir bitte eine Kopie von dem
What could I do but
Familienstammbaum
bow
der Witters
acceptance?
Vergangenheit machen?
It was Mr. Hawkins'
Dank.
interest, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes and in his bearing which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished it, I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began at once to use them, but in his own smooth, resistless way. I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of things other than business in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is it not so? As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. They were all of the thinnest foreign post, and looking at them, then at him, and noticing his quiet smile with the sharp canine teeth lying over the red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken that I should be more careful what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal letters now, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret and also to Mina, for to her I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count, if he did see it. When I had written my 2 letters, I sat quiet, reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote them to some books on his table. And then he took up my 2 and placed them with his own and put by his writing materials. After which, the instant the door had closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances, I felt that I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billington, number 7, The Crescent, Whitby. Another to Herr Leutner, Varna. The third was to Coutts and Company, London, and the fourth to Herren Klopstock and Billruth, bankers, Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. I sank back in my seat, having just had time to replace the letters as they had been, and to resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table and stamped them carefully, and then turning to me said, I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish. As at the door he turned, and after a moment's pause said, Let me advise you, my dear young friend, nay, let me warn you with all seriousness, that should you leave these rooms, you will not by any chance go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned. Should sleep now or ever overcome you, or be like to do, then haste to your own chamber or to these rooms, for your rest will then be safe. But if you be not careful in this respect, then... He finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he motioned with his hands as if he were washing them. I quite understood. My only doubt was as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed closing around me.
Yes, we do.
Later,
I endorsed the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any place where he is not. I have placed the crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus freer from dreams, and there it shall remain. When he left me, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stone stair to where I could look out towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me as compared with the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out on this, I felt that I was indeed in prison, and I seemed to want a breath of fresh air. Though it were of the night, I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence tell on me. It is destroying my nerve. I start in my own shadow and am full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows that there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in soft yellow moonlight till it was almost as light as day.
In the
Well?
soft light, the distant hills became melted,
You must
and the
tell me all
shadows
about
in the
how you
valleys
ended
and
up in
gorges of
America,
velvety
Rita.
blackness. The
And
mere
about your
beauty
hunting
seemed
there.
to cheer me. There was
You are a
peace
hunter,
and
are you not?
comfort in every breath I drew.
It's night now.
As I leaned from the
Gabriel
window,
night.
my eye was caught by
And,
something
yeah, I
moving a
hunt.
story below me
Absolutely.
and somewhat to my
Very
left,
good.
where I imagined,
Gabriel
from the
night.
order of the rooms, that the
Gabriel,
windows of the Count's
like the
own
angel.
room would look out. The window
Join
at which I
us.
stood was tall and
My
deep,
name is von
stone
Glover.
mullioned, and though
But
weather
Baron,
worn, was
Her
still
Knight is right.
complete. But it was evidently
be so
many a
stuffy.
day since the case had
I'm
been there.
formally inviting him.
I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out.
Meet my friends.
What I saw was the Count's
Chin up,
head
Saver.
coming out from the window.
That's a
I
good
did
man.
not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands, which I had had so many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter will interest and
Gentlemen,
amuse a man
I'd
when
like
he is
you
a
to
prisoner.
meet Her Knight.
But my very
Knight is a
feelings
hunting
changed to
enthusiast from
repulsion
America.
and terror
joining us for
when
a
I
while as
saw
my
the
guest.
whole man
Will give us a
slowly
chance to
emerge from the window
stimulate
and begin
our
to
language skills
crawl
and
down the
perhaps
castle wall
our
over the
brains as well,
dreadful
no?
abyss, face
Let me introduce
down,
you.
with his cloak
Her Knight,
spreading out around him
is
like
Baron
great
von Sand.
wings. At
Dr.
first, I could
Plagueman,
not believe my eyes.
we've met.
I thought it was
I'll
some
be
trick of the
down.
moonlight,
Small world, hey,
some
Doc?
weird effect of shadow. But I kept looking,
The
and it could
distinguished
be
gentleman
no
at the bar
delusion.
is Herr von Eigner.
I saw the
pleasure,
fingers and
Next
toes
to him,
grasp the corners of the
Hanneman.
stones,
Guten Abend.
worn clear of the
English
mortar
Hanneman.
by the stress of
You
years,
want to be
and by
hospitable.
thus using every
Hanneman is
projection
a
and
politician,
inequality,
and they always try
moved
to get
downwards
away.
with considerable
You must be
speed,
firm.
just
forget
as a
about me.
lizard moves along a wall.
And this is our
What
Herr
manner
Price.
of man is this? Or what manner of creature is
by
it in the
far
semblance of man?
Best in the crew.
I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear,
Very
in
interesting.
awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed about with terrors that I dare not think of.
Well, it's nice to meet all of you. Hopefully we'll be hunting together soon.
That sounds so physical.
15 May.
The more relaxing activity.
Once more,
Like
I have
drinking
seen
beer,
the
right,
Count
yeah?
go out. I have
Good
seen the
idea.
Count go out
Shall
in
we?
his lizard fashion. He
Oh,
moved
how nice
downwards
of
in a
beer,
sidelong way, some 100 feet down and a good deal to the left. He vanished into
Beer
some
is
hole
fine.
or window.
And he
When his
drinks
head
beer
had
too.
disappeared,
Wonderful.
I leaned out to try and see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do as yet.
May go if you will.
I went back to the room and, taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I had expected,
should leave
and the
too,
locks were
Baron.
comparatively new. But I went down the
Work.
stone stairs to the hall where I had entered
Good night to
originally.
you all.
I found I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great
My
chains.
God, I never thought I'd see
But the
day
door
when
was
two
locked,
good Germans
and
walk
the
out
key
on two
was
full
gone.
mugs of Weizenbier.
That key must be in the Count's room. I must watch,
you have
should
your
his door be
vices,
unlocked, so that I may get it and escape.
I'm afraid
I
to
went
say
on
so,
to make a
gentlemen,
thorough
but
examination of the various
I
stairs and passages,
quite committed.
and to try the doors that opened from them.
Baron,
One or
Well,
two
nice to
small
meet you.
rooms near the hall were
Good night.
open, but there was nothing to see in them except old furniture,
I am
dusty with
intrigued.
age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway which, though it seemed to be
I must
locked,
apologize for
gave
that.
a little under pressure.
Apparently this is not
I
the
tried
best
it harder
evening for a
and
new
found
arrival.
that it was not really locked, but that the
Very kind.
resistance came from
I'm
the fact
trying to
that the
tuck it out
hinges had
myself,
fallen
actually.
somewhat, and the
Perhaps
heavy
I could,
door rested
come
on the
by
floor.
tomorrow.
Here was an opportunity which I might
We
not have
normally meet
again,
here in the
so I
evening.
exerted myself,
You may come
and with
here
many
anytime you
efforts
wish.
forced it back so
I'll
that I
inform
could
Sarah.
enter. I was now in a wing of the castle further to the right than the rooms
my
I
card.
knew, and a story lower
It has my
down.
home address.
From the
Care to
windows,
chat?
I could see that the suite of rooms lay along to the south of
Thank
the
you.
castle. The windows of the
Good night.
end room looking out both west and
Gentlemen.
south.
Good enough
On the
tonight,
latter side, as
Shopwood.
well as to the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on three sides it was quite impregnable.
And
And
yeah.
great windows were
Mhm.
placed here where sling
Gator.
or bow or culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort, impossible to a position which had to be guarded, were secured. To the west was a great valley, and then, rising far away, great jagged mountain fastnesses,
you I
rising
will if
peak
this
on
doesn't work
peak,
out.
the sheer rock studded with
There's still a
mountain
couple of
ash
months
and
before they
thorn,
close
whose
applications.
roots clung in cracks and crevices and crannies
No,
of the
I
stone.
don't know that yet.
This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies in bygone days, for the furniture had more air of comfort than any I had seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight, flooding in through the diamond panes, enabled one to see even colors, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay over all, and disguised in some measure the ravages of time and the moth.
Sorry.
My lamp seemed to be of little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread loneliness in the place which chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it was better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying a little to school my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. Here I am, sitting at a little oak table, where in old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with much thought and many blushes, her ill-spelt love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that has happened since I closed it last. It is 19th century up to date with a vengeance, and yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had, and have, powers of their own which mere modernity cannot kill.
That's what they tell me.
Of course he must be awfully busy.
Later, the morning of 16 May.
Time when I might stop
God
by.
preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live on here, there is but one thing to hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that of all the foul things that lurk in this hateful place, the Count is the least dreadful to me? That to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I can serve his purpose? Great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that way lies madness
Gracie,
indeed.
Something's come up.
I begin to get new
on
lights
the
on
case.
certain things which have puzzled
Too
me.
bad you're not here to
Up to
help,
now,
but
I
good
never
to get
quite
handle any
knew what
research I
Shakespeare
need.
meant when he made
I know I
Hamlet
have a lot
say,
to decide,
"My
but that and the
tablets,
new book are
quick,
gonna
my
have to
tablets,
wait.
'tis meet
I have
that
a
I put
feeling
it
this is
down,"
important.
etc. For
Good.
now, feeling as though my own brain were unhinged,
I don't
or as if
think
the
so.
shock had come which must end in its undoing, I turn to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help to soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning frightened me at the time. It frightens me more now when I think of it, for in the future he has a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear to doubt what ye may say. When I had written in my diary and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. The Count's warning came into my mind, but I took a pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it the obstinacy which sleep brings as outrider. The soft moonlight soothed, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom which refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but to sleep here, where of old ladies had sat and sung and lived sweet lives, whilst their gentle breasts were sad to their menfolk away in the midst of remorseless wars. I drew a great couch out of its place near the corner, so that as I lay, I could look at the lovely view to east and south, and unthinking of and uncaring for the dust, composed myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I hope so. But I fear, for all that followed was startlingly real, so real, that now, sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe that it was all asleep.
fertig machen.
Yeah, it's okay. Fangen Sie ruhig an.
I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in any way since I came into it. I could see along the floor in the brilliant moonlight my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time that I must be dreaming when I saw them, for, though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time, and then whispered together. 2 were dark and had high
Gracie,
aquiline
something's
noses,
come up.
like the Count,
I'm on a new case.
and great, dark,
Too bad you're
piercing
not here to
eyes
help,
that
but
seemed to
Gerda
be
can handle
almost
any
red
research I need.
when contrasted with the
I'll call
pale
her
yellow
right as soon
moon.
as I can.
The other was
In the
fair,
meantime,
as
go
fair
ahead
as
and
can
fix up the
be,
shop a
with
little if
great
you want.
wavy masses of golden
flowers and
hair
stuff, but
and
don't go
eyes like
overboard.
pale sapphires.
Kind of like the old
I
place
seemed
as is.
somehow
I
to
know I
know
have a
her
lot to
face,
decide,
and to know
but
it
that
in
and the new book are
connection
going
with
to have to
some
wait.
dreamy fear.
I have a feeling
But I
this
could
is
not
important.
recollect at the
Tell
moment
Gran
how
to send
or
my love.
where. All
Gabriel.
three had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing, and at the
My
same
wallet.
time, some
I
deadly
converted some
fear.
cash to marks at the airport.
I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It is not good to note this down,
Bert Barkley
lest
knows more about
someday it
history
should
than
meet
I ever
Nina's
will,
eyes and cause her
especially
pain.
at this rate.
But it is the truth. They whispered together, and then they all three laughed. Such a silvery, musical laugh, but as hard as though the sound never could have come through the softness of human lips. It was like the intolerable, tingling sweetness of water glasses when played on by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head coquettishly, and the other two urged her on. One said, "Go on, you are first, and we shall follow. Yours is the right to begin." The other added, "He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay
Nice view of
quiet,
the Alps.
looking out under my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over me till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Sweet it was in one sense, honey sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, but with a bitter underlying the sweet, a bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood.
Pretty
I was
comfortable,
afraid to raise my
even if he
eyelids,
slept
but
in
looked
it.
out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the sharp white teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and I could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer.
All I know is that he was
Nearer.
going somewhere near Munich.
I could feel the
I
soft,
honestly do
shivering
not know where
touch
he
of the
is
lips
staying.
on the supersensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart.
You must know something about
But at that
Gabriel's new
instant,
case.
another sensation swept
is not
through me
my
as quick
business
as
to talk
lightning.
or not to
I
talk
was
about
conscious
it.
of the
Gabriel
presence
took
of the
the case
Count
with someone
and
else.
of his being
Really?
as if lapped
Who?
in a storm of fury.
Werner Huber.
As my
He
eyes
runs the
opened
Gasthof
involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with giant's power draw it back. The blue eyes transformed
So,
with fury, the
how
white
do you
teeth
like working with
champing with
Gabriel?
rage, and the fair
It is
cheeks
fine.
blazing red with passion.
Do you get along with him
But the
okay?
Count, never did I imagine
He
such
is the
wrath
bitter
and
heir.
fury, even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the woman
What are you
from
working
him,
on?
and then motioned
Plans
to
for
the
the
others,
castle.
as though he
Oh.
were beating them
What are you
back.
having done?
It was the same imperious
Lights,
gesture that I had
phones,
seen
plumbing,
used to the
all
wolves. In a
Should
voice
have been
which,
done many years
though
ago, but
low
there
and
was no
almost
money.
in a whisper, seemed to cut
Also,
through the
things
air and
need to
then
be
ring
fixed.
around the room. He
The
said,
stones?
"How
The castle is
dare
very
you
old.
touch him? Any of
Everything
you?
needs work.
How dare you
Is
cast
Gabriel
eyes on
planning to
him
live here
when I have
permanently,
forbidden
then?
it? Back,
Why not?
I tell you
It
all.
is his castle now.
This man belongs to
Then he
me.
might,
Beware how you meddle
sell
with
it.
him, or you'll have
Sell
to
it.
deal with me."
He would not do that.
The fair girl, with a laugh
Castle
of
belongs to
ribald
the Ritters.
coquetry, turned to answer him. "You yourself never loved. You never love." On this the other women joined, and such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room that it
Gabriel
almost
mentioned
made
in
me
his
faint
letter
to
that
hear.
It seemed like the pleasure of beans. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. Is it not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go, go. I must awaken him, for there is work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them, with a low laugh, as she pointed to the bag which he had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as though there were some living thing within it. For answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and a low wail, as of a half-smothered
Gabriel
child.
asked you to research?
The women closed round, whilst I was aghast with horror. But as I looked, they disappeared, and with them the dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass out through the window, for I could see outside the dim, shadowy forms for a moment before they entirely faded away. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank down.
I cannot discuss the case with you. I'm sorry, but that's just the way
And that concludes chapter 3 of Jonathan Harker's journal. Things are getting a little weirder in Castle Dracula. We'll learn more. We'll talk a bit about it tomorrow, and we'll go on to our next chapter, which will conclude the section of Jonathan Harker's journal.
There's a locked door in Gabriel's bedroom.
Thank you very much for joining me today. Today was rather a nicely spooky day.
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk about it more tomorrow. Thank you very much. I hope you had a great day and that it will continue to be a wonderful day for you. Bye.
Can I get the key?
No, the library is for Schattenjägers only.
Well, thanks.
All right.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. I'm happy to be with you today for day number 4 of our read aloud together of Dracula by Bram Stoker. It's a lovely book. So I thought we'd start out by discussing what happened yesterday. The reason I'm putting off tea is because, I got distracted by rereading over yesterday's chapter, and I forgot to pour the hot water onto my tea, so it is currently still steeping. Today's tea is a green tea with some cranberry flavor. Again, whatever that means. Hello, Helen, good to see you. So I thought we'd start by reviewing a little bit of what happened in yesterday's chapter. Then we'll pour out our tea.
Gabriel's
then
car.
We'll conclude
I wonder where the
with
keys
chapter
are.
4, the 4th segment of Jonathan Harker's journal. So yesterday we read chapter 3, Jonathan Harker's journal, also continued, and the previous day's reading had ended with his feeling like he was a prisoner in Castle Dracula. And so it began with him trying to search through the house, looking around to see what he, where he could explore, if there was any way out, and just feeling very trapped. He also decides that he needs to learn more by talking with the Count and convincing him to speak about who he is and what's going on. And so what he ends up doing is that evening, he has a conversation with the Count where he talks a bit about his history, about his family's history, of his people in that region, and they talk about that. The following evening, or a day or so later, another evening, they speak to, on the 12th, about his dealings that he's going to have with various attorneys in England. And he asks, is it possible, is it allowed to have multiple attorneys to do multiple things for me? And Jonathan Harker's like, well, it's recommended that if you're, you don't need to have different attorneys for different places per se,
I'm a
because
friend
they
of
can
Gabriel
coordinate with each
Knight.
other,
I'm staying at the
but you
castle.
certainly can have as many attorneys as you want. So they have these rather, sensible discussions, and things are going well. By the way,
the
also,
proprietor of
the
this
Count
gusto?
makes a point of telling young Jonathan
It's
Harker
very nice.
that
Do you
I would
mainly
like to
serve food and
advise
drinks
you
here?
that the house has memories and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely.
Oh?
And so he says that
Rudelsburg get a
Jonathan
lot of
Harker should make a
tourists?
point to sleep in his room. And he says, should you feel sleepy or something ever overcome you, then hasten back to your own chamber or to these rooms, the library, so that you can rest easy. Do not sleep elsewhere in the house. And he's very clear about that. Of course, we know that Jonathan Harker is going to ignore that. Let's see.
You speak English very well.
Yes.
The next day,
How did you
Jonathan
learn it?
Harker writes that he sees the Count behaving in a very odd manner. And specifically, he sees him climbing down a wall of the castle, exiting the castle by climbing down the exterior wall. And indeed, he's not just climbing like how we might climb, like say you were exiting down a wall, or climbing down something like how you might climb down a ladder with your hands on top and your feet below.
I never got to meet
Instead,
Gabriel's
he was
great
the other
uncle. What was he
direction with
like?
his head down and his feet
He was
above
a
him.
true
And I just wanted to show you a
Schottenjäger.
picture of the
Like in the old
1916
days.
edition of Dracula,
He
which has a
sings.
picture
What kinds of
illustrating this
things?
scene. So showing
Sings.
Dracula climbing face down the
He had,
wall,
how do you say it,
and magically
the
his
sight.
coat not falling
He was a
down with
very
the force
good
of
man to
gravity
go to when you
land
needed
on his
advice.
face either. So that's just an interesting illustration. So Jonathan Harker is disturbed very much by why Dracula is doing this and how he's doing this, and he describes it as
It must have
exiting
been
as a
hard for the
lizard
town when
moves
Wolfgang
along the
died.
wall. And the next day, or on the 15th,
was
he notes
bad,
again that
yes.
he's seen the Count once more
But
climbing
not a
out in such
surprise.
lizard-like fashion.
Scared on you. It was harder
Later
on us
on,
than the rest of us.
That evening,
Really?
though, or that day,
Were she and Wolfgang
Jonathan Harker
close?
decides to explore the house. He finally comes across a door.
You said
that is
Wolfgang
not
was a
locked,
true
but just appears to be
Schottenjäger.
stuck
I
with
suppose
disuse.
Gabriel-
So he pushes it open.
I mean,
and
he's
he goes
probably not
inside.
what you
And
expected.
he decides that it looks sort of like a lady's
we
waiting
shall
room.
see with
And
that
so,
one.
even
Yeah.
though
One
he
cannot know the
hears
quality
the
of the
Count's
iron
voice in his head
till
reminding
it
him
has
that
been
he
into
should
fire,
not,
huh?
he's been advised not
We
to
shall
sleep elsewhere
see.
in the house. He feels tired, and it's funny too, he even says that it's a little bit like the, how did he say it? He was like the little crankiness that comes with being sleepy, is I think how he said. And there we go. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it the obstinacy which sleep brings
Tell
as
me about
outrider.
Rittersberg.
I loved that line.
Just a
I am
small
very much
town,
one of those people as I'm falling
private.
asleep on the couch, and I'm
We
like,
keep our
and I'm
business
asked,
to
hey,
ourselves.
you look like you're tired. You
You
should go to
mean
sleep. I'm
about
like,
the
no,
Schottenjägers?
I'm fine.
The
And then I immediately
Schottenjägers,
fall back
sure.
asleep on the couch.
The Schottenjägers
So
are of
that was
this
so
place.
I related to that
And
line when Jonathan
this
Harker
place
said
is
that.
upset.
But yeah, so he feels
We behave
sleep
in
coming
the
upon him.
old
He
ways
knows
here.
he's been advised not
It's
to
not
sleep outside
changed
his room.
much over the
He decides,
centuries.
I'm going to sleep outside of my room.
You still
And so he
remember
decides to
what the
rest
rest
there
of
in
the
that little
world
room that he's
has
found where
forgotten.
he had to push the door open.
And that is?
When he awakens, he
life
realizes
is
that
a
he is
battle
not alone.
between
And in
the
fact,
light
he is joined by
and the dark.
3 mysterious women, 2 of them with dark hair like the
Do you
Count
know
himself,
this?
1 with fair hair. And the 3 of them, of course, have bright
I think
red
I
lips
mentioned that
and
I was a
very
friend of
sharp
Gabriel
white
Knight.
teeth.
Yes.
Well, I came to help him on
So
a
they
case.
talk about how
a
they
Schottenjäger
each
case.
should have a chance to kiss him. And one of them even
Well, we got our
approaches
wires
him,
crossed. They'd already
lowers
left
her
by the time
mouth
I
to
got
his
here.
neck,
But Gerda
and
mentioned
rather
that
than
he was
kissing
on a
him,
case for
he
you.
feels the sharp
No,
white
not for me.
teeth
For my
pressing
cousin,
against his
Sepp.
skin.
Lots of
And
cousins around here.
just before
Is Sepp
anything
in
happens,
town?
anything more,
No,
he's
no, he and
waiting.
his wife went
He doesn't.
north
He's
for a
just
few
waiting there for
weeks.
something to
He
happen.
does not live in
Suddenly,
Rittersberg,
boom,
anyway.
Dracula's in the room.
Huh.
He pulls the woman away, and
Well,
he tells
perhaps
her
you
that,
can help
how
me then.
dare you do this? That he belongs to
How do you
me,
mean?
and I'll give you something else in here. And he gives them a bag with something in it. And the something appears to Jonathan Harker
Gerda's
to
not
perhaps
sure where
be a
Gabriel
human
is
child.
exactly, but you
It's
know
not
where I can
verified,
find
but
him,
he
don't you?
believes It might have been a
It is
human
not my
child.
business to tell
And
people
so,
where to find a Schottenjäger. It is
Jonathan
maybe
Harker
not
finally
so safe, you see.
again, he's
Yes, I
still
do
kind
see,
of
and I
playing
appreciate your
possum almost in
caution,
the bed,
really.
like,
But we
not
worked
quite
together on his
awake,
last
not
case,
quite,
and believe me,
but
you'd be
still,
doing him a
he's observing
favor.
what's around him, but he's sort of
If he wants
pretending to be
you to
asleep and a little
help
bit
him,
confused
he
by
will have
everything.
to contact
And
you
then
at the
it
castle
appears to him
and
that
tell
the
you
3
where he
women
is himself.
fade away and
Great.
disappear with the bag of whatever was in there. And then the horror overcomes him, and he sinks down.
Do you know how
into
long Gabriel will be
unconsciousness.
gone?
So,
If he is a good
mysterious
Schottenjäger,
things happening in
he will not
Castle
come back
Dracula with
until he
Jonathan
has
Harker.
done
Now,
what
hopefully,
must
our
be
tea has
done.
had a chance to steep.
If he is
Let's
not,
see how it is.
you can say,
That's nice. That looks good.
maybe he will not
So yeah,
come
this, like I
back
said,
at
is
all.
a green tea.
What must be
with
done?
a little bit of cranberry flavor. Smells good. That is good. The cranberry is pretty faint in this one. The green tea.
Can you tell me what
is
Gabriel's
overpowering
case is
scent.
about?
I like a green tea, so that's good.
What?
Not specifically, of course, but in general. On our last case, we had to deal with a voodoo
So
cult.
let's go ahead and read chapter 4 of Jonathan
knew what he was
Harper's
up
journal.
against. Maybe I could do
And
some
as I mentioned
research.
earlier, this will
He left so
wrap
quickly, I guess.
today's
He didn't
reading
have
will wrap
time
up
to
this
investigate
first
here at
section of
all.
Jonathan
And the
Harper's
Schottenjäger
journal.
archives might
Tomorrow
have
we'll get
something
to hear
pertinent
another
in them,
voice. Oh,
if
one
I
more
knew
thing
what
I
to
should
look for,
mention,
that
too.
is.
In a lot
Yes,
of these
that is
chapters,
true.
there's multiple days
There is much to be
journal
learned
entries.
from the
What I'd like to do
Schottenjäger
too is
past.
I've been pausing
Exactly.
before I introduce
Gabriel
each
is
new
new
day.
at this, you
I'm
know?
also just going to do a
And
quick
Wolfgang's not
gesture
around to
just
give him
indicate that
advice.
we're changing to a new day. So in case anybody's looking up and not just,
All right, young
walking around the
lady.
house doing chores,
I will
whatever,
tell you
while
what it
I'm
is you
reading.
need to look
If you
for.
do happen to see that
Yes?
gesture, that's indicating it's a break between another entry into the journal. Okay, so
Werewolf?
now let's go ahead and start with chapter 4, Jonathan Harper's journal, continued. I awoke in my own bed. If it be that I had not dreamt, the Count must have carried me here. I tried to satisfy myself on the subject,
Gabriel's
but could
new
not
case
arrive at
involves
any
werewolves?
unquestionable result. To be sure,
you
there were
don't
certain
believe
small
in such
evidences,
things.
such as
I
that my
don't know,
clothes
it's a
were
little
folded
outside.
and laid by in a manner which was not my
If you
habit.
truly want
My
to be an
watch
aid
was
to a
still unwound,
Schottenjäger,
and I
you
am
have to
rigorously
believe in
accustomed
such
to wind
things,
it, the
things
last
that
thing before
are
going to bed,
outside.
and many such details. But these things are
You
no
cannot.
proof, for they may have been evidences that my mind was not as usual, and, for some cause or another, I had certainly been much upset.
All right.
I
werewolf.
must watch for proof.
What do you know
Of
about
one
them?
thing I am
Werewolves,
glad.
that is.
If it was that the Count
Some
carried me
things-
here and undressed me,
This is not the
he must
first
have been
time that
hurried in his
Rittersberg
task,
has
for my
seen the
pockets
work
are
of a
intact.
werewolf,
I am
or
sure
even
this
a
diary would
werewolf
have been a
itself.
mystery to him,
Really?
which he would not have brooked.
Oh,
He
not-
would have
not
taken
in
or
my
destroyed
lifetime,
it.
you understand.
As I look round
But
this
I was
room,
told
though
of
it
it
has
when I
not
was
been
a
to me
boy.
so full of fear,
One
it
was
is
brought
now
to
a
town.
sort of
It
sanctuary.
had killed
Excuse me.
many
Though it
people.
has been to me so
Schottenjäger
full of
caught him.
fear, it is now a sort of
He was
sanctuary.
tried here.
For nothing can be
When
more
was this?
dreadful than those awful women who
1700s, I think,
were,
somewhere
who
around in
are
there.
waiting to suck my blood. 18 May.
Thanks.
I have been down to look at that room again in daylight, for I must know the truth. When I got to the doorway at the top of the stairs, I found it closed. It had been so forcibly driven against the jamb that part of the woodwork was splintered. I could see that the bolt of the lock had not been shot, but the door is fastened from the inside. I fear it was no dream, and must act on this surmise. 19 May. I am surely in the toils. Last night the Count asked me in the suavest tones to write 3 letters, one saying that my work here was nearly done and that I should start for home within a few days, another that I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter, and the third that I had left the castle and arrived at Bistritz. I would fain have rebelled, but felt that in the present state of things it would be madness to quarrel openly with the Count, whilst I am so absolutely in his power, and to refuse would be to excite his suspicion and to arouse his anger. He knows that I know too much, and that I must not live, lest I be dangerous to him. My only chance is to prolong my opportunities. Something may occur which will give me a chance to escape.
Hallo, meine Damen.
I saw in his
Kann ich
eyes
Ihnen
something of that
behilflich sein?
glittering wrath which was
Hallo, wie geht
manifest
es Ihnen?
when he hurled that fair
Danke,
woman from
und
him.
Ihnen?
He explained
Good.
to me that posts
Ich
were few
bin
and uncertain,
Ihrer
and that my
Urlaub
writing now would
und,
ensure ease of mind
let's
to
try
my friends.
English, shall
And he
we?
assured me with so much
Yes.
impressiveness that he would
I've been studying
countermand
German
the
at home, and I
later
thought I knew a
letters,
lot, but
which
it's
would be
so
held
different
over
now
at
that I'm
Bistritz
actually
until
here.
the daytime,
Books alone are poor
until
language
due
teachers.
time,
You'll pick
in
it
case
up.
chance would admit of my
Is there
prolonging my
something I
stay.
can help you with?
That to oppose him would have been to create new suspicion. I therefore pretended to fall in with his views and asked him what dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a minute and then said,
My name
the
is Grace
first should be
Nakamura.
June
I'm
12,
staying at Schloss
the
Ritter.
second
and
June
you
19, and the
Call
third
me Herr
June
Harper.
29.
Welcome to
I
Rittersberg,
now
Miss
know the
Nakamura.
span of my
It's nice
life.
to meet you, Herr
God
Habermas.
help me. 28 May. There is a chance of escape, or at any rate of being able to send word home. A band of Zegeni have come to the castle and are encamped in the courtyard. These Zegeni are gypsies. I have notes of them in my book. They are peculiar to this part of the world, though allied to the ordinary gypsies all the world over. There are thousands of them in Hungary and Transylvania who are almost outside all law. They attach themselves as a rule to some great noble or boyar and call themselves by his name.
What can
They are fearless and without religion, save superstition, and they talk only their own varieties of the Romany tongue. I shall write some letters home, and shall try to get them to have them posted. I have already spoken to them through my window to begin acquaintanceship. They took their hats off and made obeisance and many signs, which, however, I could not understand any more than I could their spoken language. I have written the letters. Mina's is in shorthand, and I simply asked Mr. Hawkins to communicate with her. To her, I have explained my situation, but without the horrors which I may only surmise. It would shock and frighten her to death were I to expose my heart to her. Should the letters not carry, then the Count shall not know my secret or the extent of my knowledge.
What is this building?
I have given the letters. I threw them through the bars of my window with a gold piece and made what signs I could to have them posted.
Thank you.
The man who took them pressed them to his heart and bowed, and then put them in his cap. I could do no more. I stole back to the study and began to read. As the Count did not come in, I have written
Do you
here.
keep Old Town records here? Criminal trial records?
The Count has come. He sat down beside me and said in his smoothest voice as he opened two letters,
about a local trial
"The
that
Sagany
supposedly
has given me
involved a
these,
werewolf. I'd
of
like to
which,
learn more about it."
though I know not whence they come, I shall,
Sometime
of
in the
course,
1700s?
take care."
I'm afraid I would need a more specific
He must have
time
looked at it.
frame.
One is from
Many,
you,
many.
and to my friend Peter Hawkins.
Yes.
The other...
Of course.
Here he caught sight of the strange symbols
Thanks
as he
for your
opened
time.
the envelope, and the
Certainly.
dark look
Good
came
day.
into his face, and his eyes blazed wickedly. The other is a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. It is not signed. Well, so it cannot matter to us. And he calmly held letter and envelope in the flame of the lamp till they were consumed. Then he went on. The letter to Hawkins, that I shall, of course, send on, since it is yours. Your letters are sacred to me. Your pardon, my friend, that unknowingly I did break the seal. Will you not cover it again? He held out the letter to me, and with a courteous bow handed me a clean envelope. I could only redirect it and hand it to him in silence. When he went out of the room, I could hear the key turn softly.
I don't think I need
A minute
that.
later, I went over and tried it, and the door was locked. When, an hour or two later, the Count came quietly into the room, his coming awakened me, for I had gone to sleep on the sofa. He was
I don't
very
think I need
courteous and
that.
very cheery in his
I don't
manner,
think I
and
need
seeing that
that.
I had been sleeping, he said,
I don't think I
"So,
need
my
that.
friend, you are
I don't
tired.
think I need that.
Get to bed. There is the surest rest. I may not have the pleasure to talk tonight, since there are many labors to me, but you will sleep, I pray." I passed to my room and went to bed, and, strange to say, slept without dreaming. Despair had its own calms. 31 May. This morning when I woke, I thought I would provide myself with some papers and envelopes from my bag and keep them in my pocket, so that I might write in case I should get an opportunity. But again, a surprise. Again, a shock. Every scrap of paper was gone, and with it all my notes, my memoranda relating to railways and travel, my letter of credit, in fact, all that might be useful to me were I once outside the castle. I sat and pondered a while, and then some thought occurred to me, and I made search of my portmanteau and in the wardrobe where I had placed my clothes. The suit in which I had traveled was gone, and also my overcoat and rug. I could find no trace of them anywhere. This looked like some new scheme of villainy. 17 June. This morning, as I was sitting on the edge of my bed, cudgeling my brains, I heard without a crackling of whips and pounding and
Someone's
scraping
been
of
using
horses'
this
feet off
passageway.
the rocky path beyond the courtyard. With joy, I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great lighter wagons, each drawn by 8 steady horses,
Let me
and at the
guess.
head of each pair
Garrett
a
does
Slovak,
bedroom.
with his
What a
wide hat,
surprise.
great nail-studded belt, dirty sheepskin, and high boots. They had also their long staves in hand. I ran to the door, intending to descend and try and join them through the main hall, as I thought that way might be opened for them. Again, a shock. My door was fastened on the outside. Then I ran to the window and cried out to them. They looked up at me stupidly and pointed, but just then the hetman of the Zegany came out, and seeing them pointing to my window, said something, at which they laughed. Henceforth, no effort of mine, no piteous cry or agonized entreaty would make them even look at me. They resolutely turned away. The lighter wagons contained great square boxes with handles of thick rope. These were evidently empty by the ease with which the Slovaks handled them, and by their resonance as they were roughly moved. When they were all unloaded and packed in a great heap in one corner of the yard, the Slovaks were given some money by the Zegany, and spitting on it for luck, lazily went each to his horse's head. Shortly afterwards, I heard the crackling of their whips die away in the distance. 24 June, before morning. Last night the Count left me early and locked himself into his own room. As soon as I dared, I ran up the winding stair and looked out of the window, which opened south. I thought I would watch for the Count, for there is something going on. The Zegany are quartered somewhere in the castle and are doing work of some kind. I know it, for now and then I hear a faraway muffled sound as of mattock and spade, and whatever it is, it must be the end of some ruthless villainy. I had been at the window somewhat less than half an hour when I saw something coming out of the Count's window. I drew back and watched carefully and saw the whole man emerge. It was a new shock to me to find that he had on the suit of clothes which I had worn whilst traveling here, and slung over his shoulder the terrible bag which I had seen the women take away. There could be no doubt as to his quest, and in my garb, too. This, then, is his new scheme of evil, that he will allow others to see me, as they think, so that he may both leave evidence that I have been seen in the towns or villages posting my own letters, and that any wickedness which he may do shall by the local people be attributed to me. It makes me rage to think that this can go on, and whilst I am shut up here, a veritable prisoner, but without that protection of the law which is a criminal's right and consolation. I thought I would watch for the Count's return, and for a long time sat doggedly at the window. Then I began to notice that there were some quaint little specks floating in the rays of the moonlight. They were like the tiniest grains of dust, and they whirled round and gathered in clusters in a nebulous sort of way. I watched them with a sense of soothing, and a sort of calm stole over me. I leaned back in the embrasure in a more comfortable position, so that I could enjoy more fully the aerial gambolling. Something made me start up, a low, piteous howling of dogs, somewhere far below in the valley, which was hidden from my sight. Lower it seemed to ring in my ears, and the floating motes of dust to take new shapes to the sound as they danced in the moonlight. I felt myself struggling to awake to some call of my instincts. Nay, my very soul was struggling, and my half-remembered sensibilities were striving to answer the call. I was becoming hypnotized. Quicker and quicker danced the dust. The moonbeams seemed to quiver as they went by me into a mass of gloom beyond. More and more they gathered till they seemed to take dim phantom shapes, and then I started, broad awake and in full possession of my senses, and ran, screaming, from the place. The phantom shapes, which were becoming gradually materialized from the moonbeams, were those of the 3 ghostly women to whom I was doomed. I fled, and felt somewhat safer in my own room, where there was no moonlight and where the lamp was burning brightly. When a couple of hours had passed, I heard something stirring in the Count's room, something like a sharp wail quickly suppressed, and then there was silence, deep, awful silence, which chilled me. With a beating heart I tried the door, but I was locked in my prison and could do nothing. I sat down and simply cried. As I sat, I heard a sound in the courtyard without, the agonized cry of a woman. I rushed to the window and, throwing it up, peered out between the bars. There indeed was a woman with disheveled hair, holding her hands over her heart as one distressed with running.
Spirits.
She was leaning against a corner of the gateway. When she saw my face at the window, she threw herself forward and shouted in a voice laden with menace, "Monster! Give me my child!" She threw herself on her knees and, raising up her hands, cried the same words in tones which wrung my heart. Then she tore her hair and beat her breast and abandoned herself to all the violences of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and though I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere high overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling in his harsh metallic whisper. His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them purred like a pent-up dam when liberated through the wide entrance, His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them poured like a pent-up dam when liberated through the wide entrance into the courtyard.
I found the passageway.
There was no cry from the woman, and the howling of the wolves was but short.
I couldn't care less.
Before long, they streamed away singly,
with your employer, that's none of my business. What I
could not pity her,
assisting
for
the
I
shot
knew now
maker
what
crap.
had become of her child,
I gave up
and she
school
was
to
better
work on
dead.
this stuff because I thought it was important.
What shall I do?
I'm doing the
What
research
can
that
I
Gabriel
do?
wanted, and so help me.
How can I escape from this dreadful thing of
and I'm going
night
to sit
and
around
gloom
and wait for him to
fear?
call and give me permission. And if you don't like it, just tell me
25
bad.
June, morning. No man knows till he has suffered from the night how sweet and clear, how sweet and how dear to his heart and eye the morning can be. When the sun grew so high this morning that it struck the top of the great gateway opposite my window, the high spot which it touched seemed to me as if the dove from the ark had lighted there. My fear fell from me as if it had been a vaporous garment which dissolved in the warmth. I must take action of some sort whilst the courage of the day is upon me. Last night, one of my post-dated letters went to post, the first of that fatal series which is to blot out the very traces of my existence from the earth. Let me not think of it. Action. It has always been at nighttime that I have been molested or threatened, or in some way in danger or in fear. I have not yet seen the Count in the daylight. Can it be that he sleeps when others wake, that he may be awake whilst they sleep? If I could only get into his room! But there is no possible way. The door is always locked. No way for me. Yet there is a way, if one dares to take it. Where his body has gone, why may not another body go? I have seen him myself crawl from his window. Why should not I imitate him and go in by his window? The chances are desperate, but my need is more desperate still. I shall risk it. At the worst, it can only be death, and a man's death is not a cab's, and the dreaded hereafter may still be open to me. God help me in my task. Goodbye, Mina, if I fail. Goodbye, my faithful friend and second father. Goodbye, all. And last of all, Mina.
He was swift and might have escaped,
Same day,
but his fatal mistake was to
I have made
attack
the effort,
rather than run.
And, God
My
help
dagger
me,
struck
have
through
come
his
safely
chest
back
and
to this
into his
room.
right lung.
I must
As
put
I
down
had
every
agreed,
detail in
we
order.
bound the wolf
I
and
went
tied
whilst my
shut its
courage was
jaws.
fresh,
We
straight to the
brought it
window
home
on the
to
south
Rittersburg,
side, and
still
at once got
breathing,
outside
and
on
turned
this
it over
side.
to the magistrate.
The stones
I
are
prayed
big
for the
and
man's
roughly cut,
unfortunate
and the
soul.
mortar has by process
May the
of
law
time
be
been
swift
washed
and
away
merciful.
between them. I took off my boots and ventured out on the desperate way. I looked down once, so as to make sure that a sudden glimpse of the awful depth would not overcome me, but after that kept my eyes away from it. I know pretty well the direction and distance of the Count's window, and made for it as well as I could, having regard to the opportunities available. I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I was too excited, and the time to seem ridiculously short till I found myself standing on the windowsill and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation. However, when I bent down and slid feet foremost into the window,
and I have learned that he
then I
is
looked around
extremely
for the Count,
dangerous and can
but
only have the
with
most
surprise
dire
and
of
gladness
motives at heart in
made a
anything
discovery.
he pursues.
The room was empty. It was barely furnished with odd things which seemed to have never been used.
beg your
The
Highness
furniture was
only
something
this.
the same style as
Please
that
do
in the
not see
south
this
rooms
man
and was
alone,
covered
nor
with dust.
even with your
I
servants,
looked
only
for the
to guard
key,
you.
but it was not in the
I
lock,
promise
and I
you,
could not
all
find
will
it
be made
anywhere.
clear very
The
shortly
only thing
when
I
my
found was a
investigation
great
is
heap
complete.
of gold
For
in
now,
one corner.
only keep
Gold
yourself
of all
safe.
kinds.
Your most grateful
Roman and
servant,
British
Christian
and
von
Austrian
Ritter,
and Hungarian and
Schlossritter,
Greek and
Rittersburg,
Turkish
Bavaria.
money, covered with a film of dust as though it had laid long in the ground. None of it that I noticed was less than 300 years old. There were also chains and ornaments, some jeweled, but all of them old and stained. At one corner of the room was a heavy door. I tried it, for since I could not find the key of the room or the key of the outer door, which was the main object of my search, I must make further examination, or all my efforts would be in vain. It was open and led through a stone passage to a circular stairway, which went steeply down. I descended, minding carefully where I went, for the stairs were dark, being only lit by loopholes in the heavy masonry. At the bottom there was a dark tunnel-like passage through which came a deathly, sickly odor, the odor of old earth newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. At last, I pulled open a heavy door which stood ajar, and found myself in an old ruined chapel, which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The roof was broken, and in two places were steps leading to vaults. But the ground had recently been dug over, and the earth placed in great wooden boxes, manifestly those which had been brought by the Slovaks. There was nothing about, and I made a search over every inch of the ground so as not to lose a chance. I went down even into the vaults where the dim light struggled, although to do so was a dread to my very soul. Into two of these I went, but saw nothing except fragments of old coffins and piles of dust. In the third, however, I made a discovery.
Primarily a true wolf while in
there,
wolf form,
in one of the great boxes, of which there were 50 in all, on a pile of newly dug earth,
recognition of
lay
victims,
the Count.
evasion of traps,
He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, for the eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life through all their pallor.
There are
the
several
lips
ways
were
to
as red as
become a
ever,
werewolf.
but there was
They
no
include
sign of
being given the
movement,
power of
no
shape-shifting
pulse,
through
no
sorcery,
breath, no
being
beating of the
cursed by
heart.
someone whom you have
I
wronged
bent
in
over
some
him
way,
and tried to find
called the
any sign of
Lyconia
life,
curse,
but in vain.
being bitten by a
He could not
werewolf,
have lain there
and being
long, for the
born
earthly
to a
smell would
werewolf.
have passed away in a
In
few
each
hours.
case, the
By the
blood of the
side of the
subject
box was
becomes
its cover,
tainted or
pierced with
cursed,
holes here and
damnation.
there. I thought he might have the
person who
keys on
becomes a
him,
werewolf
but when I
against
went to
his will,
search, I saw the
birth,
dead eyes,
curse,
and
or
in them,
bite,
dead
is
though
not
they were,
completely damned until he
such
tastes
a
of
look
human
of
blood.
hate. Though
Once he
unconscious
does,
of me or my
his soul
presence,
is eternally
that I
damned,
fled from
and
the
nothing
place,
may redeem
and leaving
him.
the Count's room by the
Even
window,
without
crawled
tasting of
again
human
up the
blood,
castle
however,
wall.
as long as the
Regaining my
taint
room,
lays
I
upon
threw
the
myself
mortal
panting
soul,
upon the
it
bed
cannot
and
enter
tried
into heaven,
to think.
and will remain chained to the mortal plane upon death.
29
Werewolf
June.
packs.
Today is
Like
the date of my
real
last letter,
wolves,
and the
werewolves
Count
can
is
live
taking
alone for
steps to
many
prove
years,
that it was
yet the
genuine.
instinct
For again
for
I saw him
attack
leave the
often
castle
leads
by the
them
same
away from their
window and
secretive
in my clothes.
lifestyles into
As he went
revealing
down the
their
wall,
nature to a
lizard
priest
fashion,
or
I
a
wished I
close
had a gun
associate,
or some
or
lethal
converting
weapon that I
another
might
to
destroy
werewolfery
him.
for
But I
companionship.
fear that no weapon wrought
This is when
alone
the
by
otherwise
man's hand
cagey
would have
werewolf
any
opens
effect on him.
himself to detection.
I dared not
Werewolf
wait to see him
packs
return,
cause
for I
immense
feared to see
destruction.
those weird
A pack
sisters.
consists of one
I came back
werewolf
to
who
the
became
library
a werewolf
and
through
read there till I
sorcery,
fell asleep.
birth, or curse.
I was
In
awakened
other
by the
words,
Count,
his
who
is
looked
the
at me
original
as
tainted
grimly
blood.
as a man could
This
look as he
werewolf is
said,
called the
"Tomorrow,
alpha
my friend,
werewolf.
we must part.
The remaining
You
werewolves
return
in
to
the
your
pack
beautiful
are called
England,
beta werewolves
I to
because
some
they
work
became
which may
werewolves
have
to the
such
bite
an
of the
end
alpha
that we
and
may
carry
never
the
meet.
alpha's tainted blood.
Your letter home has been dispatched. Tomorrow I shall not be here, but all shall be ready for your journey.
Alpha
In
and
the
beta
morning come the
werewolves.
Sagani,
The
who have some
relationship
labors of
between
their
alpha
own
and beta
here,
werewolves
and
is a
also come
complex
some
one.
Slovaks.
Once a subject
When they
is
have
bitten
gone,
by a
my
werewolf,
carriage shall
his
come
or
for
her
you,
life
and shall
and
bear
death
you
are
to the
doomed to
Borgo
the werewolf
Pass
curse.
to meet the diligence
The
from
victim does,
Bukovina to
however, have some
Bistritz.
hope.
But
As
I
long
am
as
in
they
hopes that I shall see
themselves
more
do
of
not
you
taste
at
of
Castle
human blood,
Dracula.
the curse is reversible.
I suspected
If
him
the alpha
and
werewolf
determined
is
to
killed
test his,
through some action of the beta,
sincerity.
the beta's curse is broken.
Sincerity.
It is important
It
to
seems
note
like
that
a,
whether the beta
profanation
werewolf
of the
was bitten
word
by
to
the
write
alpha
it in
werewolf
connection with
himself
such a
or by
monster.
another beta,
So I asked him
it is
point
the
blank,
alpha who must be
why
destroyed,
may I not go
the source
tonight?
of the original tainted blood.
Because, dear sir,
It is also
my
an
coachmen
interesting
and
note that
horses
since
are away on
betas
a
and
mission.
alphas share the same common
But
blood,
I would walk
an
with
alpha
pleasure.
cannot physically
I
harm a
want to
beta
get
of his
away
own
at
bloodline
once.
by his own hand
He
without
smiled.
inflicting the same
Such
injury
a
upon
soft,
himself.
smooth,
However,
diabolical
if a beta
smile
is
that
harmed
I
or
knew
killed
there
by
was some
another,
trick
it does
behind
not
his
affect
smoothness.
the alpha.
He said, "And your baggage?" I do not care
Symptoms
about it.
of
I
werewolf
can send for it some other time.
When hunting for a werewolf,
The
it
Count
is
stood
important
up
to remember
and
that
said
your
with a
biggest
sweet
clues
courtesy,
will come
which
through your
made me
suspect's
rub my
personalities.
eyes. It seemed
Becoming
so
a werewolf
real.
is not transparent,
You
no matter
English
how the
have a
victim
saying
tries
which
to
is
hide
close
it.
to my
A
heart,
tainted
for its
subhuman
spirit
blood
is that
greatly
which
alters
rules
the
our
subject's own
boyars.
mind and personality,
Welcome the coming,
even physical appearance.
speed, the
Therefore,
parting guest.
look for symptoms
Come with
in your
me, my
human
dear young
suspects
friend.
that include
Not an
increasing
hour
violence,
shall you wait in my
increasing
house against your
aggression,
will. Though
unprovoked
sad am I
rages,
at your going,
insomnia,
and that you so suddenly
restlessness,
desire it.
and other bizarre
Come.
behavior.
With a stately
Unfortunately,
gravity,
over time,
he, with
these
the
symptoms
lamp,
can be
preceded
brought
me
under
down the
control,
stairs and along
so
the
do
hall.
not rely upon them exclusively.
Suddenly, he stopped.
A good example of this
Hark!
comes from a case reported by the
Close at
ancient
hand came
priesthood
the howling
society,
of many wolves.
Manos del
It was
Sol of
almost as
Brazil.
if the sound
A
sprang
rash
up at
of
the
werewolf
rising of his
killings there
hand,
was tracked
just
to a
as the music
high-ranking
of a great
officer in the
orchestra
army.
seems to leap
The
under the
society
baton of the
became aware of the
conductor.
man mainly through
After a
rumors of
pause
his
of a
violent
moment, he
behavior and
proceeded,
changed
in his stately
personality.
way, to the
The case
door,
was successfully
drew
resolved
back
with a
the
man's
ponderous
capture.
bolts,
Manos
unhooked
del
the heavy
Sol,
chains,
men
and
of the
began to
sun?
draw it open.
I wonder if they're like Schottenjägers,
To my
only
intense
Brazilian.
astonishment, I saw that it was unlocked. Suspiciously, I looked all around, but could see no key of any kind. As the door began to open, the howling of the wolves without grew louder and angrier. Their red jaws with champing teeth and their blunt-clawed feet as they leapt came in through the opening door. I knew then that to struggle at the moment against the Count was useless. With such allies as these at his command, I could do nothing. But still the door continued slowly to open, and only the Count's body stood in the gap. Suddenly, it struck me that this might be the moment and means of my doom. I was to be given to the wolves, and at my own instigation. There was a diabolical wickedness in the idea, great enough for the Count, and as a last chance I cried out, "Shut the door! I shall wait till morning," and covered
I
my
suppose
face
in
with
the
my
next
hands to
Backlash
hide
book,
my
good old
tears of
Fujitsu
bitter
will be
disappointment.
I
With one
suppose in the
sweep of
next
his
Blade
powerful arm,
Backlash
the
book,
Count
good old
threw the
Fujitsu
door
will be
shut,
replaced
and the
by
great bolts
Hildegard.
clanged and echoed through the hall as they shot back into their places. In silence we returned to the library, and after a minute or two I went to my own room. The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me, with a red light of triumph in his eyes, and with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. When I was in my room and about to lie down, I
Professor
thought I heard a
Barkley?
whispering
This
at
is
my
Grace
door.
Nakamura. I'm
I
calling
went
from
to it
Germany.
softly and listened.
Germany?
Unless my
I thought you were
ears
in New
deceived
Orleans.
me,
I
heard
was,
the
but
voice of the Count.
Anyway, it's rather important or I wouldn't have bothered
Back to
you.
your own place.
Do you know anything
Your time
about
is
King
not yet
Ludwig
come.
II of Bavaria?
Wait. Have patience.
That's a hell of a
Tonight
thing to
is
ask a man
mine.
in the middle of the night.
Tomorrow night is yours.
Late 1800s.
There was a low,
Yes.
sweet ripple of laughter, and in a
This
rage
isn't
I
really my
threw open the
field,
door and saw without
I
the
think he
three
was crazy.
terrible women licking their lips.
I wish I knew.
As I appeared,
Do you
they
know
all
anyone who
joined in a
specializes in
horrible
German
laugh
history?
and ran away.
Yeah,
I came
have
back
a
to my
friend at
room
the
and threw
University
myself
of
on my
Berlin.
knees.
I'll
Is
wing
it then so
What's
near
your
the
number
end?
there?
It's
Tomorrow,
4989
tomorrow,
555
Lord, help me
7878.
and those to whom I am dear.
Okay, I'll call you back if I remember this
30
conversation
June,
in the morning. Anyway.
Great.
These may be
Sorry
the last
again.
words I
Thanks,
ever
bye.
write in this diary.
Bye.
I slept till just before the dawn, and when I woke, threw myself on my knees, for I determined that if death came, he should find me ready. At last I felt the subtle change in the air, and knew that the morning had come. Then came the welcome cockcrow, and I felt that I was safe. With a glad heart I opened the door and ran down to the hall. I had seen that the door was unlocked, and now escape was before me. With hands that trembled with eagerness, I unhooked the chains and drew back the massive bolts. But the door would not move. Despair seized me. I pulled and pulled at the door and shook it till, massive as it was, it rattled in its casement. I could see the bolt shot. It had been locked after I left the Count. Then a wild desire took me to obtain the key at any risk, and I determined then and there to scale the wall again and gain the Count's room. He might kill me, but death now seemed the happier choice of evils. Without a pause, I rushed up to the east window and scrambled down the wall, as before, into the Count's room. It was empty, but that was as I expected. I could not see a key anywhere, but the heap of gold remained. I went through the door in the corner and down the winding stair and along the dark passage to the old chapel. I knew now well enough where to find the monster I sought. The great box was in the same place, close against the wall, but the lid was laid on it, not fastened down, but with the nails ready in their places to be hammered home. I knew I must reach the body for the key, so I raised the lid and laid it back against the wall. And then I saw something which filled my very soul with horror. There lay the Count, but looking as if his youth had been half renewed, for the white hair and mustache were changed to dark iron gray. The cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed ruby red underneath. The mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corners of the mouth and ran over the chin and neck. Even the deep, burning eyes seemed set amongst swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. I shuddered as I bent over to touch him, and every sense in me revolted at the contact. But I had to search, or I was lost. The coming night might see my own body a banquet in a similar way to those horrid three. I felt all over the body, but no sign could I find of the key. Then I stopped and looked at the Count. There was a mocking smile on the bloated face which seemed to drive me mad. This was the being I was helping to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come he might, amongst its teeming millions, satiate his lust for blood and create a new and ever-widening circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. The very thought drove me mad. A terrible desire came upon me to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon at hand, but I seized a shovel which the workmen had been using to fill the cases, and lifting it high, struck with the edge downward at the hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell upon me with all their blaze of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced from the face, merely making a deep gash above the forehead. The shovel fell from my hand across the box, and as I pulled it away, the flange of the blade caught the edge of the lid, which fell over again and hid the horrid thing from my sight. The last glimpse I had was of the bloated face, blood-stained and fixed with a grin of malice which would have held its own in the nethermost hell. I thought and thought what should be my next move, but my brain seemed on fire, and I waited with a despairing feeling growing over me. As I waited, I heard in the distance a gypsy song sung by merry voices coming closer, and through their song the rolling of heavy wheels and the cracking of whips. The Zegany and the Slovaks of whom the Count had spoken were coming. With a last look around and at the box which contained the vile body, I ran from the place and gained the Count's room, determined to rush out at the moment the door should be opened. With strained ears I listened and heard downstairs the grinding of the key in the great lock and the falling back of the heavy door. There must have been some other means of entry, or someone had a key for one of the locked doors. Then there came the sound of many feet tramping and dying away in some passage, which sent up a clanging echo. I turned to run down again towards the vault, where I might find the new entrance. But at the moment there seemed to come a violent puff of wind, and the door to the winding stair blew to with a shock that set the dust from the lintels flying. When I ran to push it open, I found that it was hopelessly fast. I was again a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing round me more closely. As I write, there is in the passage below a sound of many tramping feet, and the crash of weights being set down heavily, doubtless the boxes with their freight of earth. There is a sound of hammering. It is the box being nailed down. Now I can hear the heavy feet tramping again along the hall, with many other idle feet coming behind them. The door is shut. The chains rattle. There is a grinding of the key in the lock. I can hear the key withdrawn, then another door opens and shuts. I hear the creaking of lock and bolt. Hark! In the courtyard and down the rocky way, the roll of heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of the Zegany as they pass into the distance.
Are you all right?
I am alone in the castle with those awful women. Mina is a woman, and there is naught in common.
Claustrophobic.
They are devils
I
of
tell
the
you
pit.
what. Normally
I
this
shall
place is
not
locked
remain alone
to
with
keep
them.
out the village
I shall
children.
try to scale the castle
I'll leave
wall
it open.
farther than I
You
have
can
yet
come and
attempted.
go
I
as
shall
you
take
please.
some of
Would
the
you?
gold with me, lest I
Thank
want
you
it
so
later.
much.
I may find a way from this dreadful place.
Goodbye.
And then,
Good luck.
away for home,
Bye.
away to the quickest and nearest train, away from the cursed spot, from this cursed land where the devil and his children still walk with earthly feet. At least God's mercy is better than that of these monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot, a man may sleep as a man. Goodbye, all. Mina. And that concludes Jonathan Harker's journal entry. Tomorrow we hear from new voices, and we'll see if we learn whether Jonathan Harker, or I wonder at which point we'll learn if Jonathan
That's
Harker's
the church in the square.
attempt to escape from Castle Dracula was successful or not. We'll find out eventually. I actually haven't read beyond where we're at now, so I really don't know if he's going to make it out alive or not. We'll see. We'll see what happens next. So thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to joining you tomorrow for more of Dracula by Bram Stoker. Thank you very much. Bye.
Hey friends, I can't tell if this is going live or not. I'm going to assume it is. This is not my best technical day. However, I think we just went live. Okay, so hi, I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. We are reading day 5 of Dracula, and of course, this is a very spooky story about crazy and supernatural kind of things, which could perhaps explain why. Could the vampires have something to do with why I had my phone short out on me twice today and we had to go to a whole nother different kind of technology? Perhaps. Let's blame the vampires. So, again, if you were with me for the earlier 2 attempts, I do apologize. I don't know what's going on. Again, we'll try to fix it and get it better by next week. But in the meantime, we'll continue with our story, and thank you again for bearing with me. So, to recap, for those who have, in case you haven't already seen this twice, I apologize if you have. Hi, I'm Christina. We're about to read Chapter 5 of Dracula. Today I'm drinking a Darjeeling tea. It came from the Shakespeare tea shop on Indian Street. It's lovely. Okay, and I do want to sip because it really is lovely.
Where do you think I hang his portrait?
Yummy. I hope that we don't lose our connection yet again, but if we do, it's not a terrible thing, I guess. I get to have a nice sip of tea each time to start out. So, one more time. Today we are going to read Chapter 5, but before that, let's discuss a little bit about Chapter 4. Chapter 4 covers about a month and a half of action. It is Jonathan Harker's journal entries written in shorthand, which doesn't sound like a new thing to us because shorthand is not a very commonly used type of script nowadays, but at the time that this book was published in 1897, shorthand was a relatively new invention. And so the idea is that Jonathan Harker is able to write these notes about what's happening in Castle Dracula, and you can pretty safely assume that Count Dracula, even if you were to go through his things, is not going to be able to read it. And so that's why he can get pretty forthright in his journals about what's there.
What happened?
By the way, I saw a note from Adrienne that shows my phone is okay. I do too, although if it's not, maybe it's an excuse to buy a new phone. It's not a terrible thing. Let's see. Okay, so Chapter 4 starts out with Jonathan Harker waking up alone in his bed. The Count Dracula has brought him up to his bedroom and undressed him. Again, these are kind of the there's some interesting elements to the book too. It is interesting. I was actually just doing a video about this book for Banned Book Week, and because next week is the week where libraries celebrate everyone's freedom to read and making their own decisions about what books are good books, what books are not books that they agree with, or that they find to be of literary merit, or that to form their own opinions, their learned opinions based on being able to have the opportunity to read something for themselves and make up their own minds. And so Dracula, it's really interesting. Even though Dracula was published in 1897, there was actually a challenge made against the book in 1994. So 97 years after publication, the book was taken off of a reading list for schools in Texas. And part of it was because some of this sort of sexual imagery. And I think that in Chapter 3 is where we get some of that, especially too, with those women who are with Jonathan Harker, and then again here too, where the Count is undressing him. So it doesn't say that anything too untoward is happening, other than blood sucking perhaps. But there's that perhaps could be some of the controversy around Dracula. Which again, I kind of think pales next to the whole blood-sucking thing. But, to each their own, everyone makes their own decisions about books. And that is the freedom to read. Let's see. So, in this chapter, chapter 4, he starts out, and he acknowledges at the end of the first journal entry that even though he's been afraid to be in the room where he is staying at Castle Dracula, he now feels it to be so much safer, and indeed a sanctuary, compared to where he was with the 3 mysterious women, who he describes as waiting to suck my blood. So he now is convinced that these women, who again he might have at first viewed in a sexual light, are now a menace to his safety.
Not sure.
As the chapter goes on, there's some bits about how the Count had Jonathan Harker write some letters that were post-dated. We later see that the Count leaves Castle Dracula dressed up in the clothing that Jonathan Harker originally wore when he arrived, and that he delivers the letters in that clothing. And the idea that Jonathan Harker has is that the Count is trying to make it look that Jonathan Harker is still out and about, that he is himself delivering his own letters. And then also, if Count Dracula is abducting more children or killing people or whatever it was that, whatever evil he is doing in the towns, by wearing the clothing of Jonathan Harker, he might be passing suspicion onto Jonathan instead of onto himself. And so that is happening in the chapter. Also, too, there's a bit in there where some workmen deliver boxes, some crates, to the castle. And it doesn't directly say what it is they're doing. They seem to be doing something with dirt. They're shoveling things. Then later on, there are some Sekeli, I think is what Sekeli, I think they were called. The gypsies. They come by, and Jonathan Harker tries to bribe them to take one of his letters, but they actually end up turning the letters back over to the Count. So the Count knows now that Jonathan Harker was trying to communicate with the outside world, is not pleased. There were 50 boxes. Eventually Jonathan Harker decides he cannot stand being a prisoner in this way anymore, and he decides to investigate. Because so many of the doors in the castle are locked, he decides the best way to investigate to get into the Count's room, because in the daylight the Count never comes out, so he assumes he's in his room resting. Jonathan Harker decides that he too will climb like a lizard along the outside walls of the castle. So he climbs outside from his room up to the room of Count Dracula, and he goes inside. He goes down some steps, and eventually he finds the 50 boxes filled with earth, filled with sand or dirt, and in one of them there is the Count Dracula is lying, and he seems to be not dead but not quite fully alive, and it's in a weird state.
Did you need something
Eventually in the chapter, Count Dracula says he will be leaving soon, and he will arrange for passage for Jonathan Harker on the following day. But Jonathan Harker is concerned that it's not true, because when he listens outside of his door, he thinks he hears Count Dracula telling the women that tonight is mine, but tomorrow night is yours, and basically that they can have Jonathan Harker after the Count leaves. And so Jonathan Harker, when he wakes up on the morning of the 30th, he's petrified. He's convinced that this is his last day. And what he does is he gets back. He tries to.
Request for information about the death of Baron Klaus von Raleigh.
He climbs again to the room of Count Dracula, and when he goes there, he tries to kill him. But then the Count seems to somehow stop him, to compel him not to, and he is frightened and he runs away. When he runs away, the door locks behind, and he is unable to get back down to the Count. Then the workmen come, they take away the boxes, including the one that contained Count Dracula, and he is locked, and he's left alone. And he is afraid of being alone with those women, and he's thinking there has to be some way. I think I can get out of here. I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to take some of the gold that I found in Count Dracula's room, and I'm going to do my best to escape, and to die in the attempt would be better than to stay here. And so where his journal entry ends, we don't know what's going to happen next, because Jonathan Harker is going to do his best to escape. All right, now we get to start chapter 5. Thank you again for bearing with me through all of our technical difficulties today.
Treated his villagers and women very badly.
Today's chapter 5 is entitled Letter from Miss Mina Murray to Miss Lucy Westenra. And again, where we left off in the narrative was on June the 30th. This is going to be from the perspective of some other characters, and as I did before, I'll go ahead and draw a line with my hand to separate the different entries within this chapter. Okay, so let's start out with chapter 5. 9 May, my dearest Lucy. Forgive my long delay in writing, but I have been simply overwhelmed with work. The life of an assistant schoolmistress is sometimes trying. I am longing to be with you and by the sea, where we can talk together freely and build our castles in the air. I have been working very hard lately because I want to keep up with Jonathan's studies, and I have been practicing shorthand very assiduously. When we are married, I shall be able to be useful to Jonathan, and if I can stenograph well enough, I can take down what he wants to say in this way and write it out for him on the typewriter, at which also I am practicing very hard. He and I sometimes write letters in shorthand, and he is keeping a stenographic journal of his travels abroad. When I am with you, I shall keep a diary in the same way. I don't mean one of those 2 pages to the week with Sunday squeezed in a corner diaries, but a sort of journal which I can write in whenever I feel inclined. I do not suppose there will be much of interest to other people, but it is not intended for them. I may show it to Jonathan someday if there is in it anything worth sharing, but it is really an exercise book. I shall try to do what I see lady journalists do, interviewing and writing descriptions and trying to remember conversations. I am told that, with a little practice, one can remember all that goes on or that one hears said during a day. However, we shall see. I will tell you of my little plans when we meet. I have just had a few hurried lines from Jonathan from Transylvania. He is well and will be returning in about a week. I am longing to hear all his news. It must be so nice to see strange countries. I wonder if we, I mean Jonathan and I, shall ever see them together. There is the 10 o'clock bell ringing. Goodbye.
From one original
your
to
loving
another.
Mina. Tell me all the news when you write. You have not told me anything for a long time. I hear rumors, and especially of a tall, handsome, curly-haired man. And there's 3 question marks. Letter. Lucy Westenra to Mina Murray, 17 Chatham Street, Wednesday. My dearest Mina, I must say you tax me very unfairly with being a bad correspondent. I wrote you twice since we parted, and your last letter was only your second. Besides, I have nothing to tell you. There is really nothing to interest you. Town is very pleasant just now, and we go on a great deal to picture galleries and for walks and rides in the park. As to the tall, curly-haired man, I suppose it was the one who was with me at the last talk. Someone has evidently been telling tales. That was Mr. Holdenwood. He often comes to see us, and he and Mama get on very well together. They have so many things to talk about in common. We met some time ago a man that would just do for you, if you were not already engaged to Jonathan. He is an excellent parti, being handsome, well off, and of good birth. He is a doctor, and really clever. Just fancy! He is only 9 and 20, and yet he has an immense lunatic asylum all under his own care. Mr. Holmwood introduced him to me, and he called here to see us, and often comes now. I think he is one of the most resolute men I ever saw, and yet the most calm. He seems absolutely imperturbable. I can fancy what a wonderful power he must have. He has a